All right, we are live. We are live. Hey, everyone, welcome. It is Friday. It is a Pontificators night, and Chester's all buttoned up. Look at that. He's all buttoned up, looking sharp. He's a sharp-dressed man, and we are going to talk to death, a pop culture or two subjects. Today we have comic book pioneers, effects that they've had on our industry. Yeah, so we're going to get into that. And then we have a couple quick news things that we're going to get into. We're going to talk a little bit about Ruby Rose. Did she get fired? Did she quit Batwoman? Do we even give a crap about it? we have the Snyder Cut. And then we have, I guess it's official. I don't know if it is Lucasfilm or who, but somebody of credibility is saying that just pick your own canon for Star Wars. Who cares? Just pick your own. We don't care. Yeah. So how have you guys been? Bob, what's up?
I'm all right, man. It's kind of a crappy day, but it's better now.
Man, crappy day. That's not good.
It just, it's just one of those days when all the little crappies just piles up. And you're like, I'm done.
Did you say little crappies?
Little crap.
Little crap.
Those are called dingleberries, officially.
The little craps are called dingleberries. Yes, thanks for clarifying. Chester, how are you doing? You're back to work now, man. You're back to normal.
I am back to normal, and really enjoying it. The kids are happy to be back in school, and of course, very excited. Japanese may be a little more studious than your average American, but I have a feeling the American kids are going to be really happy to get back to school whenever that happens, right? And, I'm having a pretty good day. It's sunny, kind of, and I got some coffee, but the damn woman's been awful handsy this morning. I've had to deal with her. Jeez. These women these days, man. But I'm doing great. Thanks.
And before we went live, Chester was choking on a Zach joke. Chester was choking on a cherry. Was it a cherry pit or just a cherry?
No, just the cherry. But I mean, the juices were quite toxic. It's Zach's fault.
Oh my God!
Yeah. I'll tell you right now. All Zach's best stuff is always off air.
Why is that?
I come in, guns blazing.
Come in like a wrecking ball.
Yeah, and then I die out as soon as the stream starts.
As soon as the camera is on the young lad, then he freezes up. So, hey, Zach, could you unfreeze for a minute and let us know?
Oh, my head's all down.
Yeah, he's doing art.
Yeah, no, I'm doing a thing for Jason Brubaker.
Ooh,
oh, nice.
Yeah, he's quite the indie hero.
Yeah, no, he's a cool guy. I've been hanging out with him all week, so that was fun. It's been.
What was his big claim to fame? Because I remember when I was first looking into crowdfunding, it was Remind.
Yeah, Remind, and then he did Sithra, which was his second big success, and now he's working on a book called Phobos, which actually is his original claim to fame back when he was a kid. So it's like he's reimagining it, and it looks extremely cool. So I'm doing something for that. So
got a question in the chat for you there, man. Art, I got Aaron Lepestries out there. Is he on the show or?
I don't know. Is he going to be on the show? I don't know.
Send him a link.
I don't know.
I do think that was a spoiler warning.
Thanks, Aaron.
But, good job.
More blood for the blood god.
A boomer move for sure. Let me see here. Someone is saying we're sounding kind of weak. I know I got my my mic set to maximum as far as the mic. Is there some adjustment that he's doing over here?
What do you mean? Are we not coming in right? Or?
That was the YouTube audio level on your end, Art. Because I can hear the four of you guys just fine.
How do I turn it up? I haven't done anything.
It might be your mic.
My mic.
I hear Art and everybody fine.
Yeah, I hear. Everything sounds good to me. So
it does on this side. Yeah. We'll see. Let us know how that goes, guys. Just let us.
All right. Well, let's touch base with Joe, and then we'll get our special guest in here. He looks like he's eating anyway. So what's up, Joe? How's your week been?
Not too bad. Just the normal craziness. There's some things finally in Southern California that are starting to sort of kind of reopen. That's been interesting. I'm kind of testing the waters, going out, and so far it's not been bad for the most part. People are cooperating, which is good to see. For anyone who's never lived in Southern California, they don't call California the state of fruits and nuts for nothing. It's a well-earned nickname. And there's a lot of wacky people that live out here. But so far, no major problems. So hopefully things will continue to open up and we can finally get back to living life out here.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm curious, Joe. How do you test the waters, though? Me personally, I go out and hug random old ladies.
Well, I like to walk up to people and sneeze into their ear, and then yeah, and
I like
then
that one. Yeah.
you know, if they try to punch me, that's normal. If they try to punch me and call the cops, then they're still a little on edge.
But
Yeah,
the
it's
thing
true.
is, Joe's pretty fast. He can run pretty quick, so he gets away. He's wily that way. Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
All right. Well, let's get our special guest in here. I see him chomping at the bits. I'm gonna let him finish chewing though. I can see him. There he goes.
Oh, no. Get him in here now, man. Come
Get
on.
him in there now.
let's embarrass the guest. All right. Well, here we go. All right. Hey, Aaron LeBaron.
What's up, Aaron?
Awesome, man. Thanks. This is gonna be cool, man.
Yeah. What I was going to do, Aaron, here is I wanted it to be a surprise for everybody, and then you spoiled it with the chat.
Oh, well, you didn't give me any details.
He never does. He never does.
You're like, I'm on the show at 6 and there's no link. So I'm like, what's going on?
I gave your heads up. I said a link is coming or something.
No, with no explanation. What does that mean? We're having technical difficulties? Or it wasn't like, Aaron, you're a surprise guest. It was like, I got no information. So
Well, you spoiled it already. The show is ruined. Thank you.
Thanks, Art.
No. Aaron and I go way back, man. We cut each other all the time. So how you been, brother? And thank you so much for coming on.
I've been good. Thankfully, I've been working. I still working on Justice League for DC. I haven't had any interruption of work, so that's been really nice. And getting the opportunity to do some more live streams and videos and stuff for my YouTube channel. And, when you have people at home, you have a captive audience, right? So I probably got a few more people checking those out than would normally. So I think it's actually, things have been going about as smooth as they can be considering the current circumstances we're all in.
Yeah, no pencils down for you. That's good. I'm really happy. Everything that's coming out of the DC camp so far, I've really been I don't know. I think what they're doing is pretty impressive. Where they're steering away from Diamond, and then do you have that link, Joe? We have a link where they just previewed their new previews. I guess their solicitation catalog. It's got the Joker on the cover. Have you seen that yet, Aaron?
No, I don't pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, other than what I'm working on, I absolutely have no idea what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, well, you've heard that DC right now is they're pulling away from Diamond and they're going to be distributing their own books, right?
Right. Now that I knew, but in terms of details about that, I know that there was a live feed. It was a couple weeks ago now, maybe it wasn't that long ago, where they had a bunch of independent publishers and Diamond, Jeppy from Diamond, was on there. And I just remember seeing something after the fact that someone was commenting on it saying, well, I can't believe more industry professionals weren't in this chat, like nobody cares. I'm like, I don't even know about it, let alone I do care, but I didn't have any clue that was even going on.
Yeah. And also just because you're not chiming in the chat doesn't mean you weren't watching.
That's true.
Yeah. So yeah, hey Joe, do you have that? You want to lead with that? Usually, what we do is a little bit of news here, Aaron, and then we get into our topic. And the topic, and this is why I wanted you on the show, because we're going to do comic book pioneers and the effects they've had on the industry. So Chester has planned, like even the origin of comic books and how the format came about, and then we'll get into pretty much just our favorite like artists and kind of what they contributed to the industry and how it still possibly affects us to this day, which there's a lot of ripples, with even just like Siegel and Schuster, the whole superhero thing, just one, of many. So I think it'd be interesting to hear what your insight on that is. So
I actually did a lecture once at a museum. I had some my art was on display, and I gave a lecture starting from how comic books started all the way to the present. And the guy in the front row that was like, in charge of the thing kept going like this. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. It took like an hour presentation to a 2-hour presentation.
Yeah, well, you'll get to do that with Chester on this stream. So
Oh yeah.
Come on.
I have a 3-hour dissertation prepared. So
Okay.
Wrap it up. So Aaron, we have Comic Book Bob. We have Cornelius Chester Busby III. We have Zach Bradley. He's the young one. Oh, look at that! He bought the book.
Hey,
yes, he's the golden boy. The golden boy.
That.
And then we have
Aaron knows me though. He doesn't know my face, but he actually we've hung out a lot.
That's true on Mike's show, right?
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And then
they're showing their drawings all the time, and I'm just on my face because I didn't have a second camera, but I finally got that figured out.
Oh, that's cool. So we can watch you draw instead of just holding up the
me holding up the drawing every 5 minutes.
You should have seen when I first started on Mike's show, I had the camera on the side. So it would come because I'm right-handed, so it would come over the side. So everything would be kind of like weird oblong, like perspective shot.
Right.
Everything would look really wonky and weird.
I'm still doing that because I have it set up over my shoulder and I draw on my lap. I mean, I got to set up a table. I got to get organized, but
one of these days.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah, one of these days. And we have Joe Albino Thunderbun. So everybody, Aaron, Joe.
Yeah, it's good to see you in person, Aaron. I've interacted with you a little bit here and there on Twitter and YouTube, and I've admired your work for a while. So it's good to talk with you.
Thank you. It's good to actually see some of you guys face to face. I don't know why Cornelius looks familiar to me. We must know each other. I must have met you someplace.
Well, I'm a world traveler, sir. I am.
Don't.
But what Chester does is he hosts the Drawn and Quartered Fan Edition. So he runs a show. What is it? The next day, the following day after Mike's Drawn and Quartered.
That's right. And then our winner goes over to Mike's show, and we have a real prize on my show. But yeah,
sweet.
Yeah. Unlike used and abused by Mike S. Miller.
That's right. Yes. And we can say naughty words too.
Oh yeah, we can say naughty words on this show, Aaron. So if you want to drop like darn or shoot,
that's about as naughty as it gets with me. So
or dang it, you can go out on.
Yeah, that's. I'm on the wrong stream, man.
You are. Well, Art's the naughty boy over here. That's for sure. He's the rebel. So.
Yeah, I got a potty mouth, but you're the naughty boy. Yeah, Chester's always getting us demonetized with his coronavirus conversations. And
hey, man, the truth must be out there somewhere.
That's right.
Hey, Aaron, do you remember it was like it was a month or so ago on YouTube? If you said coronavirus, you get demonetized and possibly deplatformed. How's that for Big Brother?
Yeah.
If you said coronavirus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
or COVID-19.
So we were calling it. We were actual information about it, and they would then shut you down. Yeah, but just saying it got you shut down, huh?
If you just say it, yeah.
What if I said Wuhan virus? Would I really? I mean, would they come to my house and take me away at that point?
Oh goodness gracious! And I got threatened directly when I said Wu flu. Yeah, what do you got to do?
And then Chester sniffed like.
Blue panda, that kind of stuff.
We're gonna test it. We're gonna test it today, man.
We are. I told them to bring it on because I got ninjas as neighbors, so try it.
Well, Chester's coming to us live from Japan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Konnichiwa.
Yeah.
So, Joe, take it away, man.
No, I'm sharing my screen art. If you want to bring it up.
Okay, here we go.
Ooh.
So this is the latest announcement from DC about their rating system. And essentially it comes down to DC Kids, which is geared towards 8 to 12-year-olds. Then young adults, which is, 13, essentially the teen years. And then regular DC, and then DC Black Label, which
You
has...
you can go up to your settings and you can blow that up and make it bigger so we can see it, by the way. No, not
So
happening.
there's like,
All right.
I am old and I cannot see.
Yeah, exactly.
Now
I got glasses on even.
Joe is the deer in the headlights right now.
You can go to the
I'm
page and you
sorry.
can see it in any size you want, man.
I know I can. Go ahead. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Just continue. I definitely tripped something. Go ahead, dude. Yeah.
But this is the cover. This is
No, I didn't know if you were talking to Art or to me.
I can't do
No,
it.
I was talking to you, but it's all right. Continue. I apologize profusely.
Well,
Yes.
I didn't know that you'd want to zoom in on this crepey skin over here. I didn't know you were into that, Chester, but I
Okay.
can...
He was just talking about going out and hugging old women.
Don't get me started.
Not flabby armed women though.
Mhm.
Okay, moving on. The next little bit of news here is this DC Connect, which is the replacement for DC's preview, which I'm guessing is just replacing the DC supplemental catalog that retailers could order with the main previews catalog. They have previews, and then there's the DC supplemental and the Marvel supplemental.
I don't think this is going through Diamond though. I think they're going to ship this directly to retailers, and this will be how retailers will order DC Comics in the future.
Yeah, I think this replaces what used to be the DC previews
preview.
catalog.
Yeah,
So-
I'm pretty sure.
I just wanted to clarify, it's not DC. It's the Diamond catalog, right?
What used to be the Diamond catalog
It'll still be the
for
Diamond
DC.
catalog.
Yeah, there'll still be a Diamond catalog, but it will not, as far as I know, it will not have DC Comics in it.
Right. So this will be the new order catalog solicitations. I think this one's for August. So
Right.
I think it's pretty cool. I think they're leading with a really cool image. So Aaron, do you have any thoughts about DC Connect since you're still over there?
I find this interesting. I'm curious. I've heard some stuff from retailers about possibly being annoyed at the fact now that they're going to be ordering from multiple catalogs instead of just one big one again. And I don't know what you guys have heard on that front.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in the old days, there were multiple distribution outlets. Do you remember Capital? I was sad to see them leave.
Yeah.
You remember them, Aaron?
Yeah, there was Capital, Sparkle City. There was
Heroes
one.
World.
Yeah,
Heroes
World.
World. Yeah.
They weren't separate catalogs. Those were handled by region, weren't they? I mean, so if you were a comic shop in a certain area, you had Diamond or whatever. You didn't get the split catalogs until there was that big rush, when was it Marvel signed with Heroes, and then DC went to sign with Diamond, and then eventually that all imploded and Diamond, took over. But except for that one small period of time, I think that was the only time there was multiple catalogs, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think you're right. So there was Diamond running the same time as Heroes World because Heroes World was Marvel exclusive. You're right. And then the other ones were regions. So there was, Capital had their territories, Heroes World had theirs, and then Diamond had their territories as well. And I don't know, personally, I would like to get back to many different sources. I'd like to get back to some competition. Since we have you on the show, Aaron, how do you feel do you think there should be more competition as far as distribution?
Well, I think we all saw what happened with this coronavirus thing, what can happen when you've got a monopoly, and one that isn't really, I mean, Diamond for years now has really sort of treated the smaller publisher with disregard. And so if you're an independent publisher with small numbers, Diamond wouldn't even carry you in the catalog.
Yeah,
Right.
That's right.
Having multiple distribution sites will hopefully gain a little bit more competition between them, so that maybe a smaller publisher can get his book in somebody's catalog. I guess they call that free enterprise, right? That's a good system, don't you think?
Free market, such a weird concept.
Yeah, well, think about this, Aaron. So something like, Black and White Chrono Mechanics or Kit Carson or Garbage Man. If you had a distributor that was ambitious, see you need fill in, they could actually contact us directly, put those books in their catalogs, and then start distributing, or at least offering them directly to retailers. Like you said, because, I think you and I could probably get into Diamond, but there are a lot of other people that wouldn't. And also, even if we could, we would probably get lost in the landslide of book. Solicitations. That book is like this thick. How do you get seen in a book that's got, thousands upon thousands of, solicitations in it?
Well, that's always been the big question, right? If you're a smaller publisher, is how is anybody going to even notice my book? Thankfully now with social media platforms and the internet, you've got a lot more time and avenues to get your message out to people and say, hey, this is coming, look for it next year or 6 months from now, whatever. So then hopefully by the time it were to get in a catalog, or you offer it up as like an Indiegogo or Kickstarter, you've got enough people that are aware of it by the time you launch. But even that's not a guarantee. When I did Power Cube through Dark Horse, I was expecting maybe 10 to 12,000 on the sales. It ended up being about 5. And I pumped that book on social media like crazy for a year before it even came out. So it was just, it's difficult regardless. But
that's through Dark Horse. What year was that?
It was a couple of years ago. No, 2-3 years ago is all.
Wow, not long ago.
It was a Dark Horse title. I should have done it through Image, but the only reason I did it through Dark Horse was because they actually offered a little bit of money up front, and I had to pay people like my inker and mostly my inker and colorist. Because if I did everything myself, we'd still be waiting for it to come out.
Yeah.
I also think
I don't think it was a good fit subject matter wise for Dark Horse. I don't think it really appealed to their audience, but they don't sell that many books anyway, generally speaking. So
yeah. But I think that also, and we've covered this before too, is that this whole situation is exposed what happens when you got 1 point of failure.
Yeah.
And I think that regardless of what they're saying, on social media and whatnot, the comic companies, they're looking at this going, we can't do that again.
Yeah.
We won't survive it again.
right.
Well, Bob, it's kind of interesting, and going with what Aaron had said is the fact that we are hearing some of these brick and mortars complain. Not a lot, but there's a few of them, and it's odd to me because they have been we have been complaining for quite a while about the monopoly of Diamond and the various shenanigans that come up between them and the orchestrated effort from the big two as well, or big three if you'd like. And it's a bit weird for me because in the end, this is better for them. This is good for you as a brick and mortar. This could save your life. Right.
I think
a competition free market. So I don't know why we're getting complainers, but I don't know. There's a lot of whinging people these days.
I think it's different perspectives though, because I think some of the larger companies like the idea of having 1 point that one group that they have to deal with, and that's it. Some of these larger stores that are
I said that last week, Bob.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I agree, but I can also see where like those guys, those larger stores like that can survive something like this. They might not want to have to deal with multiple vendors.
Yeah. When I heard Steve Jeppy on Billy Tucci's live stream the other day, and as I was listening, because I think that was like his 3rd or 4th appearance on YouTube, and I finally figured it out. I don't think Jeppy and the people that are invested in status quo and the way things have been, I don't think they want change. I think they want that monopoly to continue. And because they're not coming up with any real progressive ideas, they're not coming up with anything that's going to expand the market. It's more about just supporting and getting back to the way things were. And I think for Jeppy and some of these retailers that seem like they're in lockstep with him, they they're all going to do well, but it's some of the mom and pop stores that are kind of like on the borderline right now before the pandemic. And then with the pandemic, they're absolutely hurting at this point. So I don't think that any change or any real leadership is going to come from that arena. I think it's still going to come from I think stuff like that we're doing. I think that even stuff that Allegiance Arts is doing, getting directly into retail stores like Walmart, things like that. I think these are going to be the pressure points, and possibly, an entrepreneurial person that comes in, like Aaron and I were talking about, see a need, fill a need, and possibly, go to some of these crowd funds and say, I would like to get your book into retail stores, and be that liaison between, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and just independents, and then start, finding those people and then getting that directly to the retailers, because that need is not really being filled. Because I do remember this was years ago when Capital City did finally go away, there were a lot of the smaller indies that were saying that Diamond just is not going to carry us. And Diamond, I think, maybe Aaron remembers, they had like a certain, like, if you won't sell X amount, or if we don't think you're going to sell X amount, then we're not even going to carry you in the catalog. So,
yeah, and I also think it comes back down to the whole idea of the benevolent dictator. Jeppy and the people that are in power, they don't think that they're doing anything wrong. They think, they're like, you guys, they're like, what, you guys would not want to see what this is like if we weren't here. You know what I mean? It's that idea that in this case, the benevolent dictator, they think that they're doing better than anybody else would be. So they don't think they're doing anything wrong.
Well, I don't think they're doing anything wrong either, per se. I just think that what they're doing is incredibly self-serving, because what Jeppy, if you hear everything he says, it's about collectability. I think he wants to keep comics in that collectability box. Like, everything he talks about is collectible. And the thing is, we're not going to expand the market or grow upon the market unless we can get into other venues. Like when we grew up, like more like your, supermarkets, drugstores, five and dimes, those type of outlets. Because I think we're all in agreement. All of us found our first comic in those areas. We didn't find them at a comic shop.
I mean, you're kind of assuming a little bit of a benevolence from the Ahore priesthood. Monopolies will not go out without a fight, dude. Yeah. Sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
I think it can be a two-prong. I think they can see that need, and they can do the collectible market. They can fill that. And then I'm hoping that what will come out of this is that somebody will start trying to distribute beyond retail outlets, and a healthy market is going to bring people into the retail outlets as well. So if a little kid that doesn't know comics even exist and sees them somewhere at a supermarket, whatever, then they can actually even know that there's product. Like, I don't even know if the kids know, comics exist. And so then they can educate themselves and then possibly start seeking it out. And then they might realize there's a retail comic shop in their area, and they have, thousands of comics, that they could go into and buy.
I think it's kind of ironic. My picture froze, first of all, but you guys can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you're a beautiful bald man. We love you. It's go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the ironic thing about all this is, one of the original reasons, at least was my understanding, that that comics were sort of moved out of the 7-Elevens and the stores and had to go into specialty shops, was because their price point wasn't high enough that the magazine distributors didn't want to deal with it, right? And so now here we are, where they actually are expensive enough, that we can actually get back, go full circle. Although, unfortunately, I think print media is pretty much dying everywhere. I mean, there's not like tons of magazines and stuff when you go into your local grocery store or whatever. There's still some, but I mean, that rack of magazines is getting smaller and smaller and smaller every year.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that getting into Walmart or whatever, I know Allegiance and is trying that, but it'll be interesting to see after a couple of months, how many they've actually sold. Because I'm not sure, do stores want that stuff in their store anymore? Or is it, do they want it? It just isn't available because people aren't buying enough of the magazines. So it's just, you know what I mean?
I hope Mitch gives us that information, by the way.
Yeah.
I think it's all going to depend on how well it does. Like if it sells and they can make money, then they're going to do it. And if it doesn't, then they won't. I just hope that, because sometimes it's the content, it's not the product. Like a comic book is a comic book, but it might not be the right content. So
Right.
the problem is like Walmart might not be that open-minded to go, well, maybe this was the wrong content, maybe we should try some different content. Or if they'll just say comics don't sell and then just cut it off at that point, which can always happen. That's fundamentally the problem. And I do understand, like from Jeppy's point of view, where he did put all his eggs into that one basket because there wasn't any place else to put it. You know what I mean? Those other venues were kind of drying up, and they did help dry up some of those venues as well. But I would like to see things to try to expand. Having said that, Aaron, do you have because we always try to pontificate on like how we could fix this or how it would, we could make this situation better. So do you have like an idea of possibly how we can get comics in a healthier place?
Well, I knew the answer to that. I'd be a rich guy, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
I'd be printing money right now. I think, I don't know. I have kind of an old-fashioned perspective on things, which probably isn't the greatest thing for changing markets, but I feel like that content-wise, the industry has sort of pigeonholed itself. I mean, we got to a point where it became adults buying comics mainly, right?
Yeah.
And then it became, well, if adults are buying comics mainly, then we're going to start putting adult content in there, right? And so then you have a bunch of comic books that have adult content. And so now, as a parent, I don't want my kid reading that anyway. So now you're shrinking it even smaller. And then they say, well, okay, what we need to do is we need to do a label for young kids comics, right? How many times has DC or Marvel tried that, right? Kind of I want you to start on this level and step up to the big boy comics when you get older. And all that is condescending to kids that want to read the books, right? So yep. I think, look, my example is always this. If you go back to when I was a kid, or when some of you guys were kids, which was much later than when I was a kid, but when I went and bought a comic book, and this was, mid to late 70s, right off the rack, there was the content in the books there was mature themes being discussed in these books, but they weren't graphically being displayed.
Yeah.
Okay, for example, a classic example I always use this is Spider-Man. I want to say it was 143. Anyway, he went to Paris and he fought the Cyclone, right? And he's having trouble with Mary Jane. So he comes back from this adventure in Paris, right? And she's waiting for him in his apartment. And so he opens the door, and there she is standing there, kind of half lit, in this kind of dark room. And she says something to the fact like, did you miss me, or did you think about me, or whatever like that? And he said, come here, let me show you. And then the last image we have is the door closing behind it. Now you can imagine whatever happened in the room after they were gone. But as a 12-year-old kid, I could read that, and my mind didn't go any farther than the closed door. If I'm adult, my mind goes farther than the closed door, but it doesn't really matter. I'm presenting subject matter that is accessible to all ages, but isn't necessarily talking down to a younger audience.
Right.
And that whole concept has been, I think we can thank, Alan Moore and Frank Miller for really sort of mature labeling comics, and Howard Chaykin too, I suppose, to a certain degree, of making comics for adults where you actually if you're under 16, you probably shouldn't be reading this kind of stuff. And that, I think, really sort of separated our audience. We've been on this path, trying to figure out how can we bring in a bigger audience. Well, you can't bring in a younger audience if your material isn't suitable for them. Right. And I don't think, like I said, I don't think putting out condescending material saying, this is for you, you're 10, this is what we want you to read. Let them read Spider-Man, just control the content, or at least control what you're showing in the content. You don't have to, I'm not talking about censorship. I'm talking about being an intelligent marketer,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Storytelling.
Comics, DC had it all worked out at one point in time. They had their Elseworlds Tales, which was like Watchmen and not Year One, but Dark Knight Returns. And then they had Vertigo. And then they just had the line of the DC Universe books. And the line of DC Universe books were pretty much, they were for all ages. And then if you wanted, you could get your Vertigo books, which were for like, older kids and, adults, and then the Elseworlds Tales as well. So it wasn't like they were making a product, like the DC universe wasn't divided that way. The DC universe was just as general and as wide reaching as possible as far as age groups and as far as just content. You know what I mean? They were trying to be as universal with it to appeal to the biggest market they could. I think now what is happening is, like you said, Aaron, the DC universe and even Marvel, the actual universe isn't writing things in more of a universal way. They're actually tailoring a certain age group or even a certain clientele, by their taste or their political leanings or whatever. And then, that in itself is only going to appeal to a smaller,
narrow group. Yeah.
Group
it's interesting you guys say this, because initially when Joe brought up, I looked at the page before when Joe put it on the Twitter, but we just breezed past it, and I was going to try to bring us back to the labeling system. So I'm glad we did. But my initial thoughts was, I like that idea, and it's probably the dad in me speaking, I guess. But now listening to him, that makes perfect sense. I didn't think of it that way. And it's actually a very good point.
Well, I think what they need to do is go back to making their mainline all-age comics, like Art was talking about, and then what you label is your mature reader stuff, and that's a separate thing. So if you have, if you have adults that want to read adult material, whether that's Black Label or however you want to label that, but don't make your main line your mature reader, or have it, PG fit 14 or whatever it is, PG-13, I guess it is. Don't make them PG-13. Make them PG, and then have your, if you want your PG-13 or your R-rated stuff, label that separately, so that you can have all ages being brought into your main universe, and then that you can get kids that are 12 and they'll read it up to the point that they're 25 or 26, and maybe they're bored with it, and maybe they'll go to the mature reader stuff. But when you have it segregated like that right now, you can't get any young readers interested. So you have a bunch of, 40 to 60-year-old, basically men reading comic books. And when they die out, that's going to be it. So where's the new audience coming from?
Yeah. And just case in point, I remember, I'd get my free comics from Marvel and DC. And then, I would think, like, what am I going to do with all these comics after I read them? Because they pile up. You know what I'm talking about, Aaron? Like the free books just pile up. So I'm like, well, I'll give them to the kids. And so then I started going, well, I should look at these books before I give them to the kids. And I was going through them, and I was like, oh my gosh! I started realizing how much of these, how they were like 90% of the books were not really in
the hospital and donate them and say, here's reading material for your kids. You can't do that.
You can't.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Not being responsible, you can't. So I ended up just having to throw the books away because I really couldn't give them away with good conscience. Yeah.
You could easily give them to Joe. Joe would find a use for them. I am
sure.
Well,
had I known Joe, I would have definitely done that. But they don't even send out the free books anymore. So I do miss that because that was a fun perk. But yeah, the subject matter was really weird. And I remember when DC did New 52, and I remember they were like, this is a more adult, whatever. And then I was kind of like, it's not really more adult because we've dealt with these subjects. You know, the comic books have dealt with this subject matter for decades now, but it is more gratuitous, and that doesn't necessarily mean adult. It just means more gratuitous. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the illustration is more mature. Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of suggestive, which makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think if they really want to make a resurgence, they have to go back to that idea where it's more ambiguous, where they can market the mainstream of comics to more than just 40-year-old guys, like you're saying.
Right.
Subtlety, Bob.
Yeah.
In this day and age.
Yeah, I know. I'm asking you to find. I'm asking you to cook with unicorn blood. I know. I get it.
I mean, my wife was watching I came home from work last night, and my wife was watching Detective Pikachu, and the girl who is the superhero of the story, she came in and she was making those typical Hollywood little comments, and says, "Well, they don't look big." And several other little comics. I just walked in the room halfway through it, and I knew exactly what the plot was and what was going to happen and how it was going to end, and I was 100% correct. Now, why is that? Because Hollywood and all the people who emulate Hollywood, which is certainly all of our comic book companies, they have lost the understanding of subtlety. So what you're suggesting is that the writers write something that is subtle and clever, and they have absolutely abandoned such thoughts.
Well, actually, Joe's comment there to Nick, I think that's part of the problem as well, is that these editors, there's so many that flood the shelf market. There's so many titles. You can't edit these things properly. So even if you wanted to go to something that was more ambiguous and more for all ages, you probably couldn't, because you don't have time to sit here and go through everything and tell everybody to trim these things down.
Well, Aaron knows this. I've said this on the show too, where comic books are for kids, like especially superhero, not the genre, not comic books, but like superhero comics. Mostly the main DC Marvel stuff are meant for kids, for young adults. And the thing is, if you try to argue that point, then who else is Spider-Man or Batman or Superman going to appeal to? Those are titles that are only going to attract a small kid, you know what I mean? A young kid, because as an adult, if you were raised with those things and the love for them, you're going, oh yeah, Batman's cool, Superman's good, cool, Spider-Man's cool. But you remember them when you were like 5 or 6 or 8, when you were introduced to those characters. So these things were always designed as like young kid, like the thing is, you start off, your parents are reading, children's books to you, before you go to bed. And then when you start reading, like you read the basic, kids books, and then you kind of progress. And the comic books helps that middle ground to get you to real novels. And if you still like action adventure, then you start getting into Burroughs or Jules Verne's or these kind of adventure stories. And then you progress into real books,
Well, I would put a stipulation on that, though, Art, that historically, because we are going to transition to this later, the Comics Code Authority is actually what kind of pushed it toward the kid side.
Yeah.
Comic books historically and where they're coming out of was quite adult. It wasn't for kids at all.
Well, I think
it became.
Well, that's why I said superhero like Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's fair.
Those are for young kids.
Well, I don't think you really have to go to the point of just marketing it strictly to kids. I think if you could go to something more like an adventure movie, like Indiana Jones, something along that line, where it'll appeal to kids, but adults could be interested in it as well. I think there's a point where you can get to that would be that sweet spot for everybody.
Well, that's where they were getting that from. I mean, Indiana Jones is an adventure comic book. Like it's all the same subject matter. It's just filmed instead of written and drawn.
And quite universal. I actually had a high school class last night, and I made an Indiana Jones joke, and they laughed.
What?
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you do something in that style, where it's aimed at like that overarching audience, it becomes timeless. People still know what Star Wars is. They know what Star Trek is. They know what Indiana Jones is. these things, this is that's the demographic. That's the idea that needs to be aimed at.
And you're not going to get into mainstream and appeal to a new market unless you can start creating a product that appeals to a wider range and is tailored to more of a universal, to have more of a universal appeal. Because also, if we do get it into mainstream, outlets, the product's going to have to change considerably to fill that need.
Yeah.
Well, the big problem also that we haven't really discussed about all this is that when we were kids, there wasn't a lot of competition. I mean, you look at the movies; those have become sort of the comic books of the modern era, right? And you've got kids. My daughter's 18, and she goes and sees Spider-Man movies, not because she likes Spider-Man, because Tom Holland's in it. But you have kids that are going, or young adults are going to see these movies because they're cool, but they're still not picking up a comic book. And we have video games. It's like we have competition now that we didn't have, when I was a kid. When we were reading kids, and whether it was in the 70s or 80s, when we were reading comic books with kids, we didn't have a lot of entertainment vying for our dollars. And now we do. And that may be the biggest hurdle to get over is how do you attract a kid who's used to playing video games to actually sitting down and reading a comic book?
And that's one of the things that we've talked about on here multiple times, that Marvel had the perfect in.
Yeah.
It's marketing and selling. Like if you went out and you started marketing and selling comic books in a more mainstream way, I think you could do a lot of good as well, because I think that part of the problem is children, kids, young adults, they don't even know this product exists, period. So they didn't grow up with it. They didn't have access to it. When you have a retail outlet that's very specific, and like even here where I live, we don't even have a comic shop. I have to drive all the way into Orange County, probably a half hour, 40 minutes just to get to a comic shop. And I live in Orange County. I live in the LA, area. That's pretty sad that I'd have to drive 40 minutes to get a comic book. So I think if you could make them more universally, like the product more universally appealing, and then you could get them in front of people, and then if you could market, because also video games and movies, if you think about it, a movie, half the budget of a movie goes into advertising that movie. Comic books they don't really have any kind of budget built in for advertising. And I think if we started advertising as an industry, I think it could change. At the very least, people would know about the product.
Do you remember those radio spots they did for Man of Steel when Byrne did that original mini that came back and kind of redid Superman for him in was that early to mid 80s?
Right, 86.
For those comics. And that thing, but comics were still selling pretty good at that time too, though.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like the industry has advertised in a more mainstream way from time to time over decades. But I think and this as well as I do, like Aaron, to build your YouTube channel or to build, your indie platform, you have to be there constantly, day in, day out, and you have to keep being in front of people, because even if you go a week, people forget who you are. They're going to go to another channel. They're going to buy another book. So the key is always to keep your IP, to keep you in front of the eyes of the consumer or the potential readers. And that's one thing about the advertising as well, because I thought DC has done a lot of cool stuff. Like when they launched the New 52, and then they were doing, they were advertising in a mainstream way. I think it was mostly for digital, but they were advertising, and I applauded that. But also, they get discouraged really quick when the numbers don't reflect and they don't get results. But the thing is, you're going to go years in advertising before you start seeing results, because that's just how these things work. You have to build a platform, right, Aaron? You have to build your social media before you're able to sell your comic book. And that's DC just expects those books. DC, Marvel, all comics. I shouldn't exclude one, but they just kind of expect the books to sell. Well, we made the book. It should just
Well,
sell.
we see that all over the place, though. I mean, there's so many TV shows and things coming out. I mean, I understand the Netflix type of format is a bit different when it comes to how money is made, but we're seeing a lot of that kind of thinking, and it's like delusional stuff. And I know we're going to. I was trying to segment to Batwoman, by the way, but before we do that.
I just want to back up. Let's not even get into that.
No. But I had a quick question for you two guys, particularly because you're in here, you DC guys. There's a lot of hate that comes at the New 52, and I never really got it because I kind of loved the New 52, and I don't understand where all the hate's coming from. Please try to explain it to me because I really enjoyed it.
I'm gonna let you.
Well, I think time it's like Star Wars. You know, anytime you change anything, half the people are going to hate it, whether it's a good change or not, just because it's change. And I think that was the problem with the New 52, because the New 52 actually was pretty good, and
it was a reboot.
And I think that anytime, Wonder Woman's in pants now, I don't like that. I mean, it's like people are looking in this culture to complain about something. And I just think that was par for the course. I think anytime people still bought the books, it wasn't like they were selling, but people were. It's like they always do. I hate what they're doing in X-Men. Then they go and buy 5 copies. You know what I mean? It's like people want to complain, but it doesn't necessarily affect their buying. I mean, when I was on Justice League International, that book, the first issue, sold over 60,000 copies, and it of course it lowered after that, but it ended up sticking around mid 30s. So it was doing for the comic book market these days. Those are nice numbers. You're making a profit on the book, and that was actually one of the books people liked because it grabbed some of the older characters or that weren't getting used that much, but they. I just think, I don't know that it really affected sales. I think people you're always going to have half your industry, half your fan base is going to complain no matter what you do. You just got to hope that 90% of them still buy it, even though 50% of them are complaining.
Right. My thing with New 52 was that I bought into all of the early pitch, right? So the early pitch was like more one and dones, streamlined continuity, like some of these like more like back to basics kind of ideas. And I liked all them, but it seemed like as soon as the Batman Court of Owls thing hit big, they went,
loved it.
They went, screw that. Let's cross over with everything. So one and dones kind of got thrown out the window. And so, and just to explain to people in the chat that might not know what one and done, like one and done's in comic is one of the older ideas where you would have a self-contained story. So like older comics used to be, you would have a complete story with your 22 pages and then maybe a plot line that would continue and pay off down the line. But it was usually you bought that book, you got a self-contained story. But what happened in comics is we started going more long form. So sometimes like what used to be wrapped up in 22 pages now might be 3 issues or 4 issues or a mini series, for that matter. And so I thought that when DC was saying more one and dones, I thought that was good because that's also how you grab new readers. If they have too much baggage, it's hard for them to come in. But if you could just pick up a book randomly and then you could get everything you need from that one book, then you have a chance because then they could go, oh, well, I'll try a Superman now, or I'll try a Spider-Man, or I'll try whatever, because they're getting self-contained stories.
What drives that, Art, and it still does, is trade paperbacks, because that's where they make their money. So you gotta have a issue story arc they can jam into a trade paperback because they're not making enough money on the floppies, and trade paperbacks are pure profit.
Well, Spider-Man was the big book that started all that. Like Bendis was writing specifically to be, packaged in a trade.
Yes.
Yeah. Damn you, Bendis. No, I think the stuff that worked for New 52 worked really well, but I think some of the things that they changed that didn't work, they just fell apart really bad. Like what they did with Teen Titans just didn't work.
I think they abandoned some of the ideas too early on.
I think that's true as well.
Yeah, I think
that's a fair point. That's a drug on. I don't want to get us too far off topic. I want you to get back to what you were doing, Art. But I will say offhand that one of the things I loved about 52, my favorite thing, was Action Comics and seeing Superman, Clark, Kal-El, living in a dingy little apartment in the city, trying to make his way and find out who he was going to be. I loved that. I thought that was really, really clever because I don't recall, and I'm pretty sure I've read every Superman comic that ever being shown before, and I just loved it. But anyway, I do apologize. Please go back to your.
Did you like Aaron and I's Solomon Grundy?
Oh yes.
But getting back to the point that we were originally talking about, like with this new rating system.
Because
wait, Bob. I want to hear what Aaron has.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I completely cut out on that.
I just wanted to tell you really quickly that I am going to log off and come back on, so my picture will not be frozen anymore because it's driving me nuts.
Hey, no,
I think it's perfect. You look very angry and old. It's precisely what you want.
Shaking fist at the sky.
I'm pretty sure you're looking at your own image.
Hey,
I don't think you're looking at Aaron.
Young boy. Watch yourself.
Sorry, I didn't mean that. But to get
wait. I gotta chastise Chester. Chester, he's a guest in our house.
You leave Aaron alone.
Hey,
Where's Dina,
bro,
Where's
man, he's a
Dina
big boy.
to get on you for disrespecting your elders? How dare
That's
you?
true. I don't know. Is he my elder?
Yeah, going back to that rating system,
Is he
folding
my-
that back into what we were talking about. And do you think that's? I don't think that this rating system is going to help with like trying to create that overarching appeal.
No, it changed. No, Aaron changed my mind. He did, because when I first saw it, I thought it was a cool idea, but no, they're right.
Yeah. As soon as I saw that, I was like, you're trying to divide everything up again. You're getting really super specific. That's how you kill books.
Yeah, it'll be easier for people to buy if parents. And how many parents are actually buying comics for their kids anyway? That's the thing. It's not like mom and dad are going to the comic shop and going, well, I can get this for Junior. I mean, the kids are going in and buying it themselves, or their parents are buying, or their adults are buying them for themselves. So, all these rating things. I mean, it's good in one hand that content-wise what you're buying, but you're right. It's kind of like, well, what if I want to read that, but I can't bring it home and let my kid read it because it's adult or whatever, So I can't lay it around and have someone actually pick it up. I mean, I think it's problematic. I think it's good on one hand. I do like rating systems. I am one of those guys that do like that because I think you need to be aware of if there's content in there that could be adversely affecting a younger person in your house. But like I said, if you just don't do that to begin with, then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. And I think that comes back into like what I think are the three overarching hurdles that comics have to overcome. And the first is appeal. The second is cost. And the third is advertising. The appeal kind of falls into the competition thing. There's so much competition right now. There's so many different mediums that they're fighting up against, like they've never had before. The cost, when comics were at their height, is when they were disposable medium. They were cheap and they were fast. And then thirdly is marketing. There have actually been a couple of God damn it. There have been a couple of creators. I know Brett, whether you like it or not, Brett Booth actually said this, and he got dragged for it. He said one of the big problems with comics today is that they think that they have a built-in market that they don't have to market to.
Right.
They think that the 18 to 25 male demographic, or that the 15 to 25 year old male demographic, they don't have to touch those guys at all. I'm like, no, those are the people you do have to, because those are the guys that everybody else aims everything else at.
Yeah, those are the men we should be touching. I had to say it, Bob. I had to say it.
Well, you knew I was going to say it, but
Yeah, if you didn't
with consent.
thunder hard.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Is like they don't advertise to that core market, and because they don't, they see something else and they go that way.
Yeah, and just the conceit that comics are going to sell themselves. Because one of the things that I know this bugs Aaron. I remember having a talk with Dan Jurgens about this. Like Dan and I were working on some book and it got canceled. It was a great book. I can't remember what it was. I do know what it was, but I'm not going to say. And it was a really good book. but the market just, you know what I mean? Like sometimes good books just don't get support. And so we were talking about that. And then the press gets a hold of it, and it's like Dan Jurgens, because usually when I work with Dan, it was just the two of us, because he writes and draws, and then, I do finishes. And so it was the two of us always like, these guys drop the ball, these guys. So the thing is, this is also a problem with the industry. Like if a book doesn't do well, the creative talent get the shaft a lot of times, and sometimes it isn't the book. It isn't the book itself. It's just that there wasn't advertising and there wasn't good buzz or advance, notice that it existed. And so I always thought, like, people that market and sell these books, there are people that have these job descriptions at Marvel and DC, and I'm always like, why don't those guys get some of this crap? You know what I mean? Like, why does it always come down on the creative people? Because you could have a book that's doing really well, or it's good. What I should say is it's good, not doing well as far as sales. And then it just, it falls to the wayside just because there wasn't advertising or there wasn't, a push behind it. And that's really disappointing.
I was just going to say, I think it's more than advertising, though. I think it's longevity. Okay. You take a book, right, with a new character, whoever it is, and you do 6 issues and say, well, it's not selling well, we're going to can it, right? You take that same book and say, we're committed to this property for 3 years regardless. By the time that 3 years is up, that character is probably, if you've done it right, is probably a lot more popular now, because you've forced your way into sort of the fandom base, and now he becomes part of canon, whether that's DC or Marvel. And it's like, where's so-and-so? They just expect him to be there because now they're familiar with him and they like him. But the problem is comic companies don't have enough overhead to absorb that kind of loss for 3 years until something catches on, right? So it has to be an overnight sensation or it's going to get canceled. And 99% of the time, there is no overnight sensations. Right. That's why you're seeing Batman and everything, and Wonder Woman and everything, and Spider-Man and everything, because they know people buy those properties because they've been around for 60 years.
Yeah.
But if you solved it by going Aaron, taking someone, they could solve it, Aaron, if they were like, hey, we're gonna get some really good talent that, some rock stars, and they're gonna make something and we'll hype that. But they don't do that because they don't want to make rock stars. They don't like that people know who you are.
That's a topic for
the problem, part of the problem is, and I ran into this when I was working on Justice League International, when they gave my covers to David Finch, right? Mm-hmm. When you have guys that you're paying superstar money to, you can't afford to put them on small books because you lose money then, because you're paying them so much for the page rate. So you have to put them on Batman. You have to put them on Justice League so that you can afford their page rates. Now that I blame the company for paying somebody that much money that you can't actually have them work because you don't make enough money on any of the books because you're paying them too much, but that is part of the problem too.
But just to back up, I don't think these companies are paying them too much. I think these companies
a lot. I think too much may be the wrong terminology.
Right. I think they need to sell more books. I think they need to actually allocate some advertising money and to actually promote and to get these books out in front of people in a way that makes sense financially. Because I think, be honest, Aaron, I think we were all underpaid. I still think a lot of the industry is underpaid.
Well, and I think that kind of folds back into the whole flood the market tactic as well. When you're putting out 80, 90, 100 books a month, you could cut your line down to like 30. You take those creative teams, you focus them on those books, those core books. All those books rise up. The sales on those books rise up because you've got those superstar teams on there now. You can afford to pay them that because you're not pushing money into these other books that barely make anything because you're trying for this, you're pushing this flood the market tactic.
And other corporations that are successful in other industries do just that. They try out different things, but if something's not working, they'll just cut the production expenses for the things that don't work, and they'll essentially focus most of their production expenses into the things that sell really well.
Mhm.
and then they'll still have enough cash that they can invest into R&D. And then when something looks like it's going to take off, then they'll put more money into marketing and all of that stuff. But you're totally right, Bob. If they would have DC has done this to an extent. I hope they do it more.
Yeah,
but
recently, I'm hoping they do. Yeah.
yeah, if the publishers would, and Marvel, they've kind of sort of done it. I don't want to get too far down that line of discussion.
They're doing it now, but it looks like they're going to head back up. So.
Right. So, but I agree with you. I mean, if you look back to if you adjust for inflation, you look back to what were the most profitable times for the publishers, and also when comics were most widely accessible, you're looking at the mid 80s to the early 90s before things started going downhill. And
Mid
if you the mid 95 is when there were some pretty scary signs, and then 96 is when the crash started. But
right,
the bubble burst.
You look at the mid 80s through the early 90s up through 94, let's say, and you've got 35 titles, maybe somebody can check me on that. 35 titles maybe from Marvel. I don't remember what DC was doing at that time, but I want to say it was in the neighborhood of 30.
They were killing Superman, Joe.
Yeah,
they were. That's correct.
They were.
I
read that while eating
and
an ice cream
even
sandwich.
then, like retail stores and comic book stores were saying that's too many titles.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but where I was going with this was that if you were to look at the numbers, you had comics everywhere in pop culture. You had stores that were booming, not just the number of stores, but the profitability of the stores who were well run. And you also had booming profits for the publishers. So it's not like having fewer titles is necessarily going to eliminate the potential for big profits. On the contrary, it was proven that if you had a smaller line that had a higher percentage of really good stories, you made a lot more money.
Yeah,
well,
quality stuff.
Just to go back to Aaron's earlier about paying artists too much money, bringing what you just said, Joe, into the discussion. How they used to motivate people in the past was not by giving a higher page rate, is to get on a better line of books. So there was a book or there was a title to aspire to. So if you were at Marvel or even if you were at DC, you wanted to get on an X book, because in that timeline, in that 10-year, area, there was profitability. So you could go onto an X book. They would pay you your same page rate, but the royalties would reflect. So they would pay you more in the form of, well, Marvel, it's an incentive, but in the form of an incentive. So you would get paid more. And I remember having this conversation with Jim Lee about page rate. I go, shouldn't we get better page rates? He goes, don't worry about it, because he already knew what the numbers were going to be on these royalties. And then he was just like, don't worry about it. It'll be worth it in the long run. And he was right. But, if you're not on those books anymore, then you are stuck with living off of your page rate. But at least there was a book to aspire to, and that a company could motivate you to get better and to work for that rate, because you would aspire to possibly get on a better book. You know what I mean? You'd bust your chops, you try to, get better, and then be worthy to get on a title that would then pay you good money. So there was incentive that was involved now, but most of these books all sell about the same. I don't know who aspires to any book anymore, other than I always wanted to do Superman or Batman or Spider-Man.
Right. Mm-hmm. And to bring up a point, to get back to something I think Zach brought up, and then Art, you had made a point about it way earlier, is that you guys were talking about putting top tier talent on books to sort of raise the entire boat, right? Yeah. I still think, though, that comes back to what Art was saying earlier about the product to begin with, because you take, for example, when Mark Wade and Kubert did Kazar, right? They were on that for about 12 issues, and then they bailed because they could not generate. I mean, Kazar would only give them so many sales,
Right.
and they did that was a great book if you read it. It really was.
Yeah, I like that.
But most of the people were like, nah, Kazar, I don't care who's on it, I'm not reading it, right? So there's only a limited amount of truth to that fact that you put somebody really good on a project and it's automatically going to sell better. That's not necessarily true, because there's some products that people, I mean, let's face it, and this is the frustrating thing for me, is we entered into this realm of superhero or bust a long time ago, and we haven't been able to get out of it. So it's like superhero books will sell, books that are not superhero books are not going to sell, right? So
or they're going to struggle.
Or they're going to struggle, right? You'll find a niche audience every once, for something, but in terms of actually raising it up to being a really good seller, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think there's any one element.
Let me finish up, and then I'll jump out of the way. Frank Miller was an opposite example, sort of, in that he took over Daredevil, and they were this close to canceling Daredevil, and he took it over, right? But it wasn't an overnight sensation, but they let him do his thing and got out of his way for a couple of years, and that became a great book and a popular book where it wasn't before, but it still was a superhero book. It wasn't like they put him on John Carter of Mars and said, hey, make this a top 10 book, because it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that and there is no one element that's causing all the problems. And another thing too, I just wanted to touch on just before we get too far off of it, is the reason why they're making money. Okay, the reason why they're doing this flood the shelf marketing tactic is it's making them money. The problem with it is not that it's making money. The problem is that it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Well, we're seeing it's diminishing returns. So
making money in short spurts.
Yeah,
that's right. And there's actually a much deeper economic process going on here. If you look back, coming in from 60s, 70s, even earlier in various on the various forms of entertainment, 3 years was the set time. Right. We're going to invest 3 years into this, and if it's successful, we continue. If not, it'll be done. Now, what that 3 years did was very important. One, you had to make the decision from the beginning, knowing we're going to spend 3 years worth of money going in here, no matter what. Therefore, we need to make sure it's good. So quality was an actual concern. Right. Also, by giving it time, which has been mentioned here several times, it allows it to become part of the zeitgeist, right? Whereas something that doesn't necessarily might hit because of the quality of the writing, if it can find its niche within the zeitgeist. And this process, on top of everything else everyone has said here about this topic, it's one of those things that rises all ships, right? The cream to the top. And it's a very important process that we have seen the media abandon. I think comics were one of the first to abandon it, actually. But we're seeing things like TV is abandoning it now as well. And it's a very unfortunate, because the way they're going about it now, you have wasting a lot of money. Your quality is going out the door. Particularly these days, quality has been thrown out for politic or agenda or things like that, which is you can do both well, but they don't care, because they've gotten rid of this panicked concern of the pencil pushers, saying, well, look, we're putting 3 years into this. It's a lot of money. We got to make sure this is going to be possibly something. And we've gotten rid of that safety measure, I think. And this is a major problem, I think, across the board in all media.
It's also what Aaron said, and I think this is very, very important. And this is why I wanna spotlight it, is that hire good talent and then get the hell out of the way.
Get the hell out of the way.
A lot of new comics right now are micromanaged to the nth degree, and the reason Frank Miller was able to do what he did is because they believed in it. And like you said, Chester, they went, okay, 3 years or however long it takes, and then that was the program. But I think now things are really micromanaged, and I believe that the higher ups, so that they can justify their existence, they get a little nervous, and so then they get back in before before the course can fully, before we can see if it's actually going to work or not. Like New 52, they changed the course, like maybe at the end of the first year, going into the second year. And maybe if they would have stayed the course a little longer, or you know what I mean, or stuck to it a little longer, then perhaps, we would have saw things flourish a little bit better. Case in point, I'm going to go back to you, Aaron, but I want to say that, like, I remember what's the Looney Tunes guy's name?
Mel Blanc.
Bugs Bunny.
No, not Mel Blanc, but the guy, the creator of all that stuff.
Chuck Jones.
Chuck Jones.
Thank you.
Chuck Jones. Yeah.
He said the reason why Looney Tunes was able to exist and flourish is because Warner Brothers had no idea what they were doing. Right? Yeah. They just allocated funds and left those guys alone, and they came up with all this stuff. I heard Jerry Seinfeld talk about the Seinfeld success, and he said the reason it succeeded is because they didn't understand it, and furthermore, for some reason, it fell between the cracks. So if this was any other show and they were focused on it, they would have canceled it because that show did not do well immediately. It found an audience, but if they would have treated that like any other show on NBC, it would have been canceled. So there is something to that formula as well, that, hire people and get the hell out of the way. Go ahead, Aaron.
Well, I was going to say the sad irony in all this is when Disney bought Marvel and Warner Brothers bought DC, our first reaction was, oh, thank goodness. Now we have kind of a financial base to secure it. But what has actually happened is they've been getting so much pressure from Disney and Warner Brothers and such. You got to turn a profit. You got to make money. You got to do this. So that's why you have so many people now nervous in upper, in the editorial and beyond in these companies, and things are changing because they're constantly under this unbearable pressure of, we have to, they can't take a chance anymore, because if they fail, they're in huge trouble. So we were actually in a better creative position before these companies were sold to these big mega corporations.
Oh, yeah.
Which is unusual because, Disney makes, hundreds of billions a year. Warner Brothers makes billions a year. You'd think they wouldn't even, or now AT&T, you wouldn't even think they would even worry about the $50 or $60 million that DC or Marvel Comics is generating a year. It's like, why would they even care? But they do, and I think that pressure, that downward pressure, has really hurt the creativity of the industry.
Did you ever hear it's Frank Zappa, man? I love that guy. He was talking about his industry. This was years, before he died and stuff, that he said this. And he was saying, when the music industry was young, it was run by all these old guys, right? They were cigar smoking, uptight guys. And you thought they didn't understand anything that we were doing. They never will, whatever. And there's a lot of contempt for them. He goes, you know what? Those guys were wiser than any new executive working right now, because they were smart enough to go, I don't understand it. Let's let it ride. You know what I mean? And now people are like, I understand it, and I'm going to get right in the middle of this thing. You know what I mean? And I'm going to micromanage it. I'm going to tell you how to do your job. This is how you should write your song. This is how you should write your comic book, and they do stuff like that. And I think that fundamentally creativity cannot really flourish under that. There are some people that can excel with that kind of corporate pressure, but I think more often than not, it doesn't get to flourish. It doesn't get to be great, because it's being micromanaged to an extent. So it's only going to go so far. You're never going to get true greatness, with that kind of restriction.
Art, I actually played a Frank Zappa song with Carlos Santana at the Blue Planet Festival in 1984.
Was it Titties and Beer?
No, it was Uncle Meat.
Uncle Meat.
Cool story, bro.
Look at Aaron, just like, I can't believe I came on the show.
So I got a question. I got a question for Art and Aaron. What would be a good example for the chat of an editor who gave you guys the creative license to essentially do your own thing, where they knew who you were, They knew what you could bring to a project, and they trusted you guys that you were going to do your best to tell a great story, and they were pretty much hands off.
Aaron, go for it.
The only time that's ever really happened with me was when I was at Malibu working on Sludge. I mean, they literally just let me do whatever I wanted. And when I was at Marvel before that, and I'm not blaming Marvel for this, I'm blaming me for this, but I put so much pressure on myself. I created this pressure that I was always afraid that if I screwed up, it'd be my last gig, and I'm trying to break in, and I'm working on this stuff and getting opportunities. And I sort of outguessed myself to a point that I was doing some really horrible work when I should have been doing really good work. And when I went over to Malibu, because they offered me like ridiculous money at the time, and I'll tell you this, when I was at Marvel and I broke in, I was making $85 a page penciling, whatever I got to pencil. And Malibu came and offered me $135 a page.
Wow.
So it's like, why would I not take that, right?
Yeah.
And they were desperate because no one wants to go to a startup company because they know chances are it's going to fail, and 9 times out of 10 they always do. But a young guy like me, I was like, oh my gosh, $135 a page, heck yeah! And then they just got out of my way, and so I went from being this obscure, crappy artist at Marvel to someone who got noticed a little bit because of my work on Sludge, and that was because I was totally. I was not worried at all about my job or my position. And they did not come in and try and say, hey, do this, do that. They were just very complimentary and very, hey, do your thing. And then when Gerber wouldn't turn a script in, I started writing the series. So it was, that was really good. I'm trying to think of one of the reasons I always would pitch to Dan DiDio at DC, like obscure things. Like I did a Metamorpho miniseries, right? Or I did, I'm trying to think, like the Garbage Man thing. That turned out really well. That's the other example. And it's funny that it'd be a monster book, but where they just, because I was partially creator owned, the Garbage Man thing. They had, I don't even know that anybody cared what I was doing. You know what I mean? I would turn pages in, and I had Joey Cavalieri was he was like a freelance editor for DC at the time. So he was like my editor, and he's like, oh, that's good to me. And that kind of thing. And because it was a creator-owned book, I think they sort of felt like, well, we can't really tell them what to do anyway. So they just let me do my thing. And it's probably the best artwork I've ever done in comics was in Garbage Man. And the Metamorpho thing. But anyway, so I would always pitch stuff to Dan, like these obscure things. Let's do the Creeper. Let's do Metamorpho. And he'd never want to do it. They wouldn't sell. But I also knew if I was writing and drawing them, a character that they didn't care about, they'd let me do whatever I wanted and no one would bug me about it. Now, that one didn't necessarily come true in Metamorpho to a certain extent because Dan had this crossover thing that had to be worked into the Metamorpho series. And so it sort of, luckily, it kind of fit into with what I was doing story-wise. But that's the only times I can think of where, I just kind of felt like, I can just do my own thing and it was happy with how it all came out.
Right. I remember working at Marvel, and there's a lot of people that said, oh, Bob Harris isn't a really good editor, but he was the perfect editor for those X books at the time because Bob supported the talent. Like if you came on, like he had a good eye for talent, he could find them, and then he just got out of the way and just made sure that all the things you needed were taken care of. Like what a good editor should. Make sure that you're paid well, make sure you're paid on time, make sure you have your schedule, all these things. And he did all of that, just boom, boom, boom. And he'd give you little tidbits like, well, like in the X books, if you remember, like always, if you're going to design a cover, we want the heroes up in the logo because on the newsstand, you only get this much and you can see the logo. But if they can see a character in there too, it's a little extra selling point. And, so we had like little tidbits like that. But it wasn't like this is the way you have to do it. These were suggestions. And I remember one time, like just whenever I had a problem, Bob just took care of it. And sometimes, they were ego problems and Bob was on it. But it was never about like story. It was never like you're drawing this wrong. It was never creative. It was more administrative. And then when I worked with with Mike Carlin. Mike Carlin was probably the best editor that I ever worked with, as far as he was day to day. He was into the creative process. He was in all those things, but he also knew to back off and let his team do what they did. So he was more like, he would guide you, you know what I mean, into getting the best stuff. Like, he knew all of the different people that worked, because at that time there were 3 Superman teams, and they were all working on like one story, like a beginning, middle, and end. And they all came out every month. So he was orchestrating all that and making sure everything was taken care of. And he was never really that, like, you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way. Just kind of funneling things and just kind of guiding it into where it needed to be. And I always thought that was, it was a great working experience. And I was kind of like Aaron when I worked with Mike. I was really young. So I think like I kind of needed that. I needed that kind of mentor, you know, to kind of guide, but not tell you like, this is how or that's how to do it. It was more just kind of like, we're just kind of moving in this direction in a gentle way. There was never any kind of like mandates or anything like that. And I think corporates, like comics now, are a little bit more corporate. And I think there are these mandates on high and things that you have to do. So those would be my 2.
What do you think, Zach?
Oh yeah, no, I was actually I've been holding a question in for everybody, really.
Oh, better out than in, brother. And
well, I've been trying to be polite and
Zach's
wait my turn.
to explode.
Wait my turn. Which was you know, you talk about like the bigger corporations coming in and how much of it do you think was like, you know, they bought Marvel and DC, and they didn't buy them because of the comics, they bought them because of the movies that were getting produced. And they saw money in it,
Yeah.
you know? And how much of that is, do you think that there was a disconnect of like, hey, you're a media, make more media that will sell. But the thing is that comics are a very unique and very, something you have to take your time with in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Anybody who makes comics knows this. And it's very different than movies. It's very different than just a book. You know, it's because it's amalgamation of a bunch of different things, and they don't understand that a comic book is not a movie. A comic book is not a book. A comic book is not, you know, X, Y, and Z. It's not a video game. Yet these people come in and they try to force it like it is one of these things, you know, and then they build this whole entire business structure on the same way as that Hollywood would handle it, or how all these other studios that you know, have nothing to do with it. You know, you see this happening in the video games, especially, where there's just way too many cooks in the kitchen and nothing's actually getting done. And then they have these huge crunch periods, and then they make these absolutely terrible games and stuff. And it just feels like that there's these corporate entities don't understand that they don't respect the medium. They don't respect the creative process that it actually takes to make these things what they are. And why would a person pick up a video game compared to a comic? It's because they're 2 completely different things. And when you try to make so you can't distinguish between the 2, then you're really like killing your base, your audience, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think like what, in a nutshell, what you're saying is like, did the industry shift or change when these movies started doing really, really well? And I would say yes, but also there was a paradigm shift, I think, just as far as way business is run. Because I have a friend that's an executive at the Disney parks, and he told me like these kids coming out of business school, and the new business norm is that instead of coming into a company as a leader and then assessing it and seeing what works and what doesn't, what they do now is they come in and they dismantle the company and then they rebuild it. And if you look at a lot of like new business models, there's a lot of that going on. So I think that's because of the on high. It's like they feel like they have to justify a paycheck or to appease their overlords. They have to look like they're being more hands-on, at least to their corporate overlords. So you see more heavy-handed stuff where I think the industry was smaller before. Especially Marvel was just, it was grassroots, man. I mean, they were in Publishers Row. They weren't like DC. They weren't, up New York. They weren't in the expensive area. They were in Publishers Row. And so they were just very by the seat of their pants. And so everybody within that company knew each other. They knew what was going on, and they just kind of built this together. There wasn't any separation, but now I think there is a little bit of a separation where there's a corporate and then there's the comic books, but the corporate is still in comics. You know what I mean? Like the leaders there are still the hands-on guys, but they're more corporate guys than they were before. You know what I mean? So they're more kind of not doing what necessarily needs to be done with comics. They're doing what they think their corporate overlords want them to do.
And then they're hiring people that are like, oh, you're a script writer for a movie. Okay, now write a comic.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. It's like they're taking people out of their element and out of the medium and juxtaposing themselves into another medium and expecting it to be good.
Yeah. It's trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Right, and it doesn't go the other way equally as well either.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen things with Jeff Johns over there working with the Warner Brothers DC movies, and I love Jeff's stuff, but he hasn't really translated it very well, has he?
No, and then you go back to.
I don't think he's got a chance. I mean, the thing is, when that whole Joss Whedon thing went down, they needed some heads to roll. So him and his partner, their heads rolled. But the thing is, they also greenlit Aquaman and Shazam, and those did very, very well. And they also greenlit this new Wonder Woman that's happening right now. So you never
doing well and being good are not the same thing, Art. Just to clarify.
Yeah.
But
let's get into the comic book pioneers and stuff like that, because I really want to hear what Aaron's take on this is, because we kind of this is what happens on this show, Aaron. These things just get a life of their own.
We go off on a tangent of a tangent. So
yeah. So let's start with our guest. So we're going to get into like early comic book pioneers.
My wife's head is peeking in the corner.
Is it?
Yeah.
Where? Oh,
Hello. Hello. She's like my wife. She hates the camera, always hiding. Yeah.
One of these things when I'm looking my most stellar, beautiful self. So
My wife says the same thing.
Emma's in 6 weeks. It's not a good look.
Well, all people know my wife by is her hands, so her hands will come to frame every once in a while.
Mine's by the back. There you go. You got the back of her hair there. She just got a haircut yesterday. Everybody clap. Good. There you go. They love your hair, baby.
Joe, you've never seen a good David S. Goyer movie?
Other than the first Blade?
He wrote Batman Begins.
Did he write or did he plot?
Wait. The Nolan film?
Yeah.
No, he did not. It was Jonathan Nolan.
I was gonna say it was the Nolan brothers.
Yeah,
He has a writer credit on it.
Yeah, he does, but that was early on, and I think he was more like the Batman stuff. They were going with him on, but it was really Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan that put that thing together. You can tell too, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just saw that he also wrote Terminator Dark Fate, so that wipes out any goodwill.
I think
You're much braver than my wife. She won't do that. I've told her many times, come say hello to the boys. She won't do it.
Braver on the screen.
Now we all have our wives in here.
Right?
No, mine won't even come in the room.
Right.
So we all know that Aaron has the bravest of wives.
Yep. He wins.
Why is that?
She's not scared.
She's not scared of the camera.
So what do you think, man? What's we're going on to the pioneers of the industry, right?
Yep.
Yeah, do we want maybe Chester can give us a quick
yes, please,
and
so we can get it out of the way.
Chester, it's late in the show, so we need a quick break.
I'm timing you, man.
I can't even get good 2 minutes worth of historical referencing. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. But anyway, I do want to take just a minute to talk a little bit about the history of comics, because what these guys are going to be talking about, I'm sure, is coming from the Platinum Age up. Right? I mean, that's what they're going to be covering, and fair enough, particularly when we get into superhero comics, which is kind of what we are, right? But comic books have been around a long time, and that little old invention in 1440 by Mr. Gutenberg, that printing press thing, changed the world, dude. And one of the things that led up to was newspapers, of course, and we saw a lot of comic strips in newspapers, which you guys know, but I'm not going to talk about that. We'll leave that aside. I want to talk about actual comic books. I think a lot of people would certainly understand that Mr. Benjamin Franklin did a lot of those little things. He put little pictures together with little snarky comments or his little limericks and stuff like that together. And you could consider that a comic book. But there is actually a couple of people that did actual comic book stuff. That was kind of interesting because at that time, like if you're looking at like the late 17th century, like 1680s to the 1750s and stuff like that, there was a lot of political angst going on in the world, particularly between England and France. And what you saw was a lot of political sniping. And in that, we got some of the very first comic books. And I do have a picture or two to share here. Let me share my screen real quick.
Are these the pamphlets?
The what?
They were more pamphlets.
Yeah, they were kind of like little pamphlets, little handout things. Sometimes they would come with inside the almanacs that would go out every year. The Farmer's Almanac, of course, in America particularly. But we'll also see them in newspapers whereas we understand newspaper comic strips as being little strips in the back of the paper, which was really a competitive thing that came out much later. But they would actually put whole sections in the newspapers back in those days talking about stuff. Now, this right here, what I'm showing right here, this is actually a picture from William Hogarth, which is one of my favorite artists from that period. And as you can see, the guy's freaking phenomenal, right? And this guy is like in the early 17 somethings, right?
This Photoshop?
He's no Alex Ross.
Well, dude, it's badass though. I mean, come on, that's badass.
It's not comic art. What is this?
Yes, but it is an example of his art, and they did a lot of comic book stuff where this was the original format. They would have 6 to 10 panels on a page, and it was 8 by 11 paper. And I do believe, as far as I can find, unless someone can argue with me on it, and you might be right, I do believe your standard paper that you guys use is actually coming out of the comic books from these eras, from pre-revolution to all the way up to the Civil War, because the standard size of those comic satirical art picture books, which they call them, were done on that paper size, same paper size you guys use as artists.
No, it's printed. It's printed at that size. The standard size for artists is 11 by 17.
Yes, but I'm talking about the printed size, right?
Yeah.
How we came to that. I did some research. I tried to find a way to debunk my thought, and I wasn't able to find it. Maybe someone knows more than I do on it. But nevertheless, there was another artist as well, George Townsend, which might be more familiar because of his political stuff with people who care about such things. But he did a lot of these kind of things, right?
Now we're talking. Yeah.
Right. Now this is political. There's a lot of with the stuff going on in Canada at the time, and of course responding to the ongoing fight between England and France. But this guy did a lot of this kind of stuff, and it's satirical, and it's very, very comic book y. And like I said, they put him in his
balloon. There's an actual comic book balloon here.
Yeah, that's right. And so I just thought I'd mention that it's much more political lampooning than it is, an actual story. But I feel it is kind of the inception of the idea. Now, most people think of the Yellow Kid when they think of early stuff, which I won't get into that. I'll let these guys handle that. I want to talk about the pre stuff. But you had in the the mid 19th century, before the Civil War, actually, you had some things coming out in England and other countries that eventually, there was actually a Swiss artist, Topher, that was quite popular, and he had the Adventures of Obadiah Oldbuck. And Obadiah Oldbuck went for a very, very long time. And it was very, very popular. And it was done 6 to 10 panels a page, where all the story was written at the bottom of the page instead of being in panel, right? But it's very reminiscent of a comic book. And I do believe I have a representation of that, don't I? Yes, I do. Here we go. But here you see one of those old things. Now, on this page right here, this person, thecomicsbooks.com, is trying to put together a history of it, and he's done a pretty good job, because another really popular book for a long time in the mid 19th centuries was the Brownies series. Now, the Brownies kind of evolved from what we know as a brownie, the fairy, the English fairy, and it evolved itself into the thing that became very popular in America, particularly with the street urchin, the street kids thing. And this was coming directly out of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, of course, and Oliver and all those other things that were contemporarily written. And the little street gangs, you see this right here, they have like Hogan's Alley right here. And of course, that led up to our gang, or the Little Rascals, as a lot of people know them. So it continued for an extremely long time. And there were a lot of these little comic books, these 8x11 comic books that had these little stories of these kids. And of course, this evolved over time into the Platinum Age, which I'm sure these guys are going to get into. And of course, the Yellow Kid, which most people would consider to be the first actual comic book. But I just thought it was pretty cool. It was interesting that we don't really think about this 18th, well, actually 16th, 18th, and 19th century. There were actual comic books around. So,
yep.
There you go.
There were cave drawings and paintings before then.
There were.
So let's go with Bob. So Bob, what would your contribution be with like kind of a ripple effect, like comic book pioneers or things that you think were very impactful? Not just like, we don't have to go in chronological order, but just things that you thought like personally were big, big events. There's some jokes happening here with Aaron.
Yeah.
My wife is showing me funny dog videos.
I can't get over TikTok.
Oh God, my wife does the same thing. Cats and babies and dogs. God, women.
Wait.
Women.
Here we go. Wait. Hold on. Let's see if I can do this.
Oh, baby, look, there's a puppy digging in a baby's stroller. Yeah.
Oh, if you don't leave me alone.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Dogs, I love the. Yes. All right, I'm out.
All right.
I can't get over it. They're just.
Back to the show, folks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Chester said, like most of us, we're coming from like the 40s and the 50s forward. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, obviously, Schuster and Siegel, those guys,
Sure.
They created the first superhero, the first,
And the best.
and the one that's been the gold standard ever since. So
And I will fight you. I'm ready.
Interestingly enough, though, I everybody's seen the documentaries at this point, so we all know that originally he was created to be the bad guy. He was originally created to be
the Ubermensch.
The Ubermensch, yeah. Which is kind of cool because they've actually I don't know if you guys working for DC, that they've actually done those multiversity books, where they've kind of actually gone back to that that idea, where that they did that one shot where Superman was actually raised by the Nazis, and then you got books like Red Sun and whatnot. So, but yeah, just strictly going back to that, those guys, they kind of created that entire mythos and generation. It's just exploded exponentially from that.
Whatever happened to Superman? Did that go anywhere? I mean,
I don't know. No, I think they said they made a couple of movies about it or something. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's you got two guys from Cleveland, in this little house. Which, by the way, you can actually up here in Cleveland, you actually go on the tour of the house.
Wow.
And it
Can you
literally
touch stuff and take pictures?
You can take pictures, but you can't touch stuff.
Oh, that's nice. They won't let you do that in the Darwin house. It's really not fair.
It's not.
But just the idea that these guys, that's how far-reaching comic books have come. And is there any symbol more recognizable other than maybe the cross?
Okay, so
Superman shield.
They created an entire industry. All right.
But there you go.
Well, I would say the Shadow created the industry, but they certainly hit big with Superman. That's for sure.
No, they created a superhero industry. I mean,
yeah.
I see.
They didn't create. They may not have created comics. Comics have been around since long before that. I mean, you had you had the comics from the 1920s. You had the books like what was it, Little Abner and all that kind of stuff like that. You had all kinds of things like that.
Those were comic strips.
Comic strips turned into comic books.
Yeah. Popeye had a few actual pamphlets too.
Yeah.
He wasn't just newspaper strips.
Lone Ranger, the Lone Ranger, those books. So they had, comic books existed, but specifically the superhero genre, which then went out and kind of defined what comic books were going forward, that started there.
So how about you, Aaron?
Well, I think we have to go all the way back to the beginning of the Gaines family tree. William Gaines' father, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe is the one who actually got the idea to put together all these newspaper strips, bundle them in magazines. And I mean, can you imagine living at that time? It's like, okay, we're going to print a bunch of these up. We're going to go take them and drop them off at the corner newsstand, and we'll go back and check tomorrow morning and see how well they've sold. And they completely sold out of these things. And so that's when they started reprinting the comic strips in comic book form, and then got the idea, hey, if we can do this cheap enough, we can come up with some original content. And I want to say, was Detective Comics the first, number one? Was that the first original content comic book to come out of all of this madness? I'm pretty sure it was.
I'm not sure. It might have been, yeah.
That's the first one I can think of offhand, yeah.
Issue cover, and it's really almost impossible to find anywhere because it's, but I believe that, I may be mistaken, but I think that was the, if not the first, one of the first original content comic books that was done. And then I think it's interesting that, you had, Gaines got this industry rolling, at least the industry that we know. And then you have his son, William Gaines, who was such an important contributor in the, the 50s with EC Comics and Mad Magazine. So it's kind of funny. Father
I have the son's picture up, Art.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Well, keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
I just think it's, there's William Gaines. I just think it's funny that you have a father.
Did this guy front the Grateful Dead and he has an ice cream flavor?
I think so. Yeah.
But I think it's kind of unusual that you have somebody that started an industry essentially, and then his son ends up being such a major contributor in the industry as well, not just, by producing product or whatever, but actually being a pioneer in a lot of ways as well, in a different stage in the same industry.
I love those stories, man. I love those stories. It's like, oh, these comic strips, maybe we could package them into some kind of pamphlet or something.
Right.
And then somebody's like, yeah, well, let's make some original content.
Buy them, and
yeah.
If I had done that, if I spent a bunch of my money printing that stuff up, dropping it off a newsstand, I'd go back the next morning and they'd still be sitting there.
No.
And that's what, and until I think until Detective Comics number one, like you said, before that, all comics were basically collections of the strips.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was, and then Detective Comics number one, I think, was the first time they actually sat down and made a sequential, what we would consider to be a real comic book.
Right. And that was, I think, I'd have to go check because I haven't done my lecture in a long time, but I want to say that it was around 34 to 36, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's like the first 4 or 5 years, I think it was 1931 when they first packaged that stuff and did this. So I think the first 3 or 4 years of that was just the reprint material. Yeah, baby. And then
this might have helped. I'm just making a suggestion. I do apologize.
Yeah, and Batman didn't debut in Detective Comics until, what was it, 27? But Detective Comics was the first one that actually, like we said, did that the sequential thing.
Yeah.
So that would probably put Detective #1 at probably about 1936 then.
Actually, I'm gonna look it up here.
37, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, because I think superheroes hit hit in the mid
38.
yeah 30
Oh, wait a minute.
or late 30s. Yeah.
38. Yeah.
Comics #1 was 38, so Batman came out after that, so he would have had to have been 39, I believe.
Yeah, it was
That
pretty.
That would put Detective Comics right around 1936 or 37, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you had detective picture stories before that as well.
That
That was quite
actually,
a popular comic.
We're all wrong.
a pulp. So you're talking about a comic book?
Yeah, I'm talking about the comic book. They had a bunch of mystery stories and stuff, and they transferred it over into the detective picture book, right? And it was a comic. It was around the same time in the 30s. Yeah.
Actually, we're all completely wrong. The first actual legit comic book that we would think about would be is New Fun Comics.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, that was 1935. It predated Detective by 2 years, and that's where they debuted characters Dr. Fate, Aquaman, Green Arrow, Spectre.
Spectre, yeah,
Spectre, yeah, that's cool, dude.
I want to throw out there something else though before Art takes over. The quality comics from the 40s. They to me were such an interesting study. That studio that Eisner run, okay, and you had basically they had in that studio working out of that studio was Eisner, Lou Fine, Reed Crandall, Jack Cole, with the exception of C.C. Beck, who was a really really good artist, and I don't know if Mac Rayboy was in that group or not, but those guys that actually started forming quality comics, which would have been National Comics, Uncle Sam stuff, Crack Comics, which would be a great name for a modern comic now.
It was a great title then.
They're to me very interesting because the quality of their artists was so far superior to everybody else, and yet their books never really caught on. You know, it's interesting that they had maybe a year or two during the war when everything was selling, right? But I guess maybe it was a little too early in the stages of comic book development because you still had almost exclusively little kids buying comic books, right? So they're going to give a rip if Reed Crandall draws 10 times better than, whoever's hacking something out for Marvel or DC at the same time.
Well, all the great artists, comic book artists or cartoon artists were doing newspaper strips because that's where the money was.
Right. They wanted to use comic books as a stepping stone to get their own newspaper strip because that's where the money was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's funny to think about now, right? Like people would aspire to do the newspaper strips. Like Little Nemo in Slumberland. Holy crap, man. You talk about some groundbreaking art. I love that stuff.
Even when I was a kid, in the 70s, that was still the thing. If you could get a syndicated newspaper strip, you were going to make some money because of merchandising. I mean, not just because of all the papers you were in and the percentage you were getting of that, but also the merchandising and then toys or cartoon shows. And, I mean, that was the thing. And it was tough to get in. I think I sent a few things into King Features and all that kind of stuff, when I was like 16 trying to get in on it. But, yeah, that was still a thing, and it's kind of sad that sort of died out because that was, as a kid and even as an adult, I always read two things: the sports section and the comic book pages, and that was it, And then
even Stan Lee and was it Romita Sr. that were doing Spider-Man newspaper strips?
Yeah.
Yep.
And Paul
I
Ryan,
remember reading those.
Paul Ryan did the newspaper for years. They used to have a Conan strip as well. I don't know if you guys know that.
Conan strip? I never knew that.
Never saw it.
That's cool.
Wow.
I don't know.
And I do love how Aaron just kind of walked past Will Eisner, just walked right past it.
Well, he's my guy that I was going to chime in on. So he'll get covered.
Comics. I said he was part of that studio, so I did mention him.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, everybody knows, like, Jack Kirby and Stan and everybody like that. We're just
Sure.
trying to find some of those
All
names
right,
that people maybe don't know.
You had your turn.
Shut up. Well, actually, I'm gonna bow out and I'm gonna let Joe in here. I'm gonna let Todd in here because I gotta get ready for work.
Oh, I thought we were replacing Todd with Aaron.
No. I was going to say something mean, but I'm not going to say it.
I was excited for half a minute.
Aaron, it was aimed at Todd.
It was.
But,
all right, Bob, you have a great weekend. Thanks for coming in, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
Talk to you guys
Later,
later.
dude. See you on Tuesday.
Yep.
All right, let's get Todd in. Hey, Todd, what's up? Oh, Todd.
Oh, God. Here it goes.
We need to hear you, Todd.
Now, don't just let it go.
All right, Todd, Aaron, Todd.
Hey, Todd, great to hear from you.
Yeah, no,
Aaron fits right in here.
he does. It's perfect.
Does anybody know sign language? Can we try to communicate, Todd? No.
I know sign language.
Oh shit! No.
I'm sorry, Mike.
Hey, that's universal, baby. Everybody knows that one.
There he is. Todd's back. What's up, Todd?
Yeah, I know Aaron from. We had him on the show. We actually had him on the show around the same time we had you on Coffee Akihabara. But anyway, I've been backstage with a few things to say, but this topic where I didn't know we were going to go back to really talking about where did comics begin and this and that. I thought we were going to talk about artists who were really instrumental in creating like the whole look changed, and then this guy came along, and then the whole look changed, and then this guy came along, and then the whole look changed.
We were, Todd, but Chester, he derailed everything. Now he had to give
with his etymology, right?
Yeah.
Etymology speaking. I don't get to meet Aaron's very often. Aaron, do you know what your name means?
Oh no!
Sorry, Aaron. He does this to everyone.
Can you mute Chester?
Right.
I know it means enlightened or learned one.
It does. Well, it's an Aryan, right? Of course, the great wise men of the ancient world. And of course, it means the rod of Aaron. So what it basically means is you're Gandalf.
Yeah. And then you have a nice rod.
White. I just jumped right past the gray, and I'm
They did. Yeah, that's right.
Past the rod part of it.
See, Zach, I made it entertaining.
Hey, you know what?
Hater.
I commend you, and I take it back.
You guys were starting to hint on the fact that the money was in strips, and some of the great draftsmen were in strips. Like you talked about the Hal Fosters and Al Williamsons and Prince Valiant, Conan strip, or the original Conan strip. Even Frazetta doing the 58 through 59 of Little Abner. So there were really great artists that were doing stuff in strip form, and not all of them, but many of them sort of migrated into comics. Was there a point where the money started equaling, or was it the dry up of the syndication?
I don't think so. I think any time that, well, I don't know. Was there comic strip guys that were? I think it's all work related. I mean, if you lost your newspaper strip, you're going to go into comics because that's the most accessible thing. But comics never paid well, at least not until the 80s. They didn't start paying a little bit better when Shooter implemented royalties and things like that over at Marvel. I think guys used comic books as a stepping stone to go someplace else. It was never a destination. It was always a starting point. Even if you look into the 70s, right, you had Barry Smith doing Conan, Wrightson doing Swamp Thing. Those guys got out of comics as fast as they could and did their own thing at the studio for a while because there was no money there. I mean, there really wasn't. These guys were working their butts off and making nothing.
Well, what they did back then is it's like even John Buscema would talk about this, is they would go for the advertising dollar. So those guys would do advertising work because it paid them well. And when they couldn't get the advertising work, then they slummed it doing comic books. And the equivalent that in California was always that there was animation had a period where they would go into production, and then around the summertime they would, the season would end. And so then if there was anybody that did that type of work that lived here, then they did comic books, in the off season of animation. So yeah, like comic books were, I guess, always kind of like, the default. They weren't the destination unless it was me, because it was my destination.
Yeah, I don't think comics really became a destination until the late 80s and early 90s when, I think Byrne on X-Men, and then beyond that, of course, Jim Lee and that whole crew that formed Image and stuff. There was no one looked at comics and said, wow, that's a great career or a way to make a lot of money. Even when I was trying to get into comics, my original plan, I was 16 in 1980, and I was following the Wrights and Barry Smith model. It's like, I want to get into comics for a few years, get a following, and then branch out and do my own stuff, because that's where the money would be. That's the way I thought of it. And, 40 years later, here I am.
Finally figuring it out that it wasn't
making any money. But no, I mean, I've done okay. You do okay if you can keep busy, because page rates have gone up and stuff, so you can actually make a living doing this. But unless you sell an intellectual property or something, you're not going to make big money. I mean, there's a couple guys if you get on Batman at the right time or whatever, where you can get some big royalties for a course of a couple years, or during the boom years, guys made a ton of money off royalties. Unfortunately, I came in right after that. So,
well, it's really interesting you say that. People came in to try to make a name, get out as soon as they could, using it as a platform, because that's one of the big problems we have today, particularly with Marvel. We have a lot of these artists and writers coming in, and they're looking for a platform to get a movie deal or what have you, TV deal or something like that. And I'd never really thought about the fact that, well, that might have been going on since inception. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's different people. Some people were very content in there, but some people it wasn't enough. And then some people, like you brought up, Byrne. The reason he was a big envy, when I remember talking with Rob Liefeld before we broke into business, we're like, the only way you're going to make money is you have to do volume, right? We would always say volume, and then we'd use John Byrne as like, that guy does 2 and 3 books a month. That guy is, that's who you aspire to. And usually the reality is, if you could get 22 pages done in 30 days, then you were doing pretty good.
Think about it. That really was the model. I mean, Buscema was working on several books at a time. Kirby doing several books at a time. Neil Adams used to joke, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he said he really hated going from doing Jerry Lewis comics to Batman comics, because Jerry Lewis, he said, I could do 10 pages a day. When I get to Batman, I could only do 7.
Yeah.
Jeez. 7 pages a day. Goodness.
Think about it. If you were doing 5 or 6 pages a day, I mean, I can't even imagine that, but let's just say you were, even getting paid, a pittance back then, that was a lot of money if you could keep that up over a regular long haul. I mean, you were earning every dime, but you could make decent money if you were cranking out that many pages. You could make a living, I guess. But
that's why I never faulted John Byrne. Remember was it Alpha Flight, where it was the snowstorm? Yeah. I never faulted him, man. And then the splash page issue where they were just splash pages, so we only had to really do one composition.
Marvel Age.
Yeah, versus 6. Yeah, I was always like, yeah, it's a fun experiment, but also, man, it's just a way of maybe giving yourself a little bit of a breather, because you're in like a crazy, cycle.
Well, expectations have changed so much. And this kind of dawned on me a year or two ago. I was at New York, and there was this young guy. He was watching Terry Dodson's booth right next to me at our table. And he was an art student and really, really good, right? And I was looking at his stuff, and I said, are you a comic book fan? I mean, is that what you want to get into? And he's like, no. He goes, I just want to get into illustration, doing magazine illustration and stuff like that. And I'm like, do you have a time machine? Because I realized that this kid, he was young, he didn't know, but that stuff doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
So what you have now in comic books is you have some of the best art illustration that's ever been in comics, because you have all these illustrators that have no place else to go. So they go into, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best comic book work, but it's some great illustration, right? And to your point earlier was that about the writers wanting to write TV shows or whatever, use it as a launching pad. Yeah. The difference was when artists were using comics as a launching pad, they were still drawing comics. When these guys come in as writers, they're writing episodic television, which is boring as hell in comic book form. And that's part of the reason I think that some of the comic book stuff, and again, my opinion being old school, it's killing comics to a certain degree because there's so much. I don't want to read a television show when I'm reading a comic book. I want to read a comic book. And I think that's hurting it a little bit with too many guys going in with that attitude.
Preach it, brother.
Hey,
it's a talking heads book at that point.
Right.
And what makes, like, if you have an actor that has a lot of charisma and you have some good editing, you could do a 30-minute sitcom or a TV show. But a comic book, like, it needs to move, man. You need to show things happening. It's a visual medium. Unless you're Alan Moore and you can write some crazy, amazing dialogue, nobody wants that. I'd rather read a novel.
Right.
I don't know where a lot of these guys went that were really good writers. I know some of them write outside of the big two, like Rick Remender and Greg Rucka, but the Colin Bunns, the Kieran Gillians, the guys that were really instrumental to the early 2000s that were good writers, they all kind of left at the same time without anything much to say about why we're going this way. And I really like to get one of those guys on the show, because there must be a reason they decided, you know what, comic books are going this way and we're going to go that way because we're not liking this direction. Because a lot of the really good writers, I'm talking about, you look at the late 90s and early 2000s, a lot of those guys that wrote, and sometimes you get a little pigeonholed into these events and stuff, but a lot of those guys that wrote good material, completely not gone from comics, but gone from Marvel and DC.
Yeah,
I don't know. Chasing the buck.
Well, you industry guys are mentioning doing a lot of name dropping, and it's all cool, and I'm following.
Damn right we are.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's cool because I can follow it because it's been, it's something I really enjoy and spend a lot of time doing. But everyone might not necessarily be that, and I think it would be really cool to kind of look at one of them in more detail. Because, like, for instance, Joe wants to talk about Will Eisner, and to be fair, I don't know much about him, other than the fact that I love his art. I mean, passionately love it.
Well, let me add one thing about the people leaving. Is it because, like you guys talked about before I got in here, and I mentioned in the chat, like, the R&D of comics has completely gone out of it.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
The idea of, okay, we trust what you've done in the past, so you take this guy or these characters or X, go forward with it, and we'll see where it goes. That's completely seems like it's gone. So is that why all these artists and not artists, but so much
at all.
The writers are going, hey, no, I don't want to create things that might turn into IPs for you. I want to create things that are just great and they happen to turn into IPs or they happen to turn into a movie.
I think everybody has their own reasons for it. I don't think there's just like one reason why, writers just have, jumped ship. So I can't really speak to that. And it's a little bit off topic, but that would be a fun future Pontificators. We should do that, Todd. I do want to hear what Joe has to say about Will Eisner.
Yeah, so do I.
Well, so for anybody in the chat who's not really familiar with him, he was a very influential artist and creator who is the one that the Eisner Awards are named after. He was along with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, he's one of those guys who grew up in New York in the 20s and 30s. He came from a pretty poor Jewish family, and his father was an artist in Vienna, Austria, and his mother was from Romania, and they immigrated to the U.S.
Well, what about his impact on the industry?
Yeah, so the only reason I bring that up is that we were talking before about how there's this tendency in times past, and it seems recently, for comics to be seen as somewhat slumming it as far as the arts go. And with Eisner, Kirby, Stan Lee, that was true for them as well when they were coming up. And Stan Lee has said on multiple occasions that he used to be ashamed when he would be at parties and people would ask him what he would do. He would say writer. And if they pressed him, he would say fiction writer. He tried to do everything he could to avoid saying comic book writer. And so Eisner grew up in that same dynamic. But he was definitely always interested in art, and he brought to comics several different things that some were of the time, but one of the things that he brought that has continued to have an impact on artists up until today is his storytelling ability, and the way that he would try to layer in multiple different storytelling elements within a single panel. And if you think about it in filmmaking terms, you'll have a movie where, let's say the writer, the cinematographer, and the director are all working together to lay in certain elements that are subtle. And you may not understand when in the first, let's say, 30 minutes of the film, that a particular element, like a piece of clothing or a sign or something like that, is going to be important. But as the story unfolds, those elements are brought up and their importance is then revealed. And Eisner had a way of doing that in his comics. Now he's most known for...
I have to interrupt. Look at behind Aaron, the garbage man. I mean, that's kind of a nod right there, to Will Eisner, where you'd actually put the title of either the character or the book, the story, I mean, in the art. There you go, Aaron. Thanks. Yeah. And that's there's a ripple right there. There's a legacy right there. Right. Where Aaron, is kind of keying into, some of the design elements that Eisner brought to comic books.
Aaron pulled that off quite a bit too, not just in that one image, but always in every time. Every Garbage Man was in this sort of anthology with Amethyst and someone else, and every title page he did that. It was excellent.
But I'll tell you this, and this is the interesting thing about Eisner, is that I had, for a guy who was as influential as Eisner was, and who had he had worked out a deal where he had the Spirit, full page newspaper comic strip in the 40s. No one knows who the Spirit is. No one knows who Eisner was for years until the comic book people sort of elevated him and said, "Hey, look at this guy." And I just find it interesting that a guy that was that contributed that much was so really obscure. And this, I didn't get this from Eisner. I got this from Stranko, who got it from Eisner.
Right.
That's funny, right?
That's cool.
That's
cool. Ripples.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Have a legacy of these
a really interesting thing, though, if you could bring that picture, I chose that picture very explicitly. Right here, if you look at this picture, I think it's interesting. A lot of times when you have people who are talking about Eisner's art, they'll make kind of the references that Art just did, but they also usually show his cityscapes, which I understand why. But I like this picture even better, because if you look at this simple little panel here, the dynamic that's going on and the perfection of the movement in this piece is impressive as hell. And how long ago? Because that is the spirit sitting there, or at least I'm pretty sure that's the spirit. But look at it. Look at the movement of the door. The piece of the door is broken out, and then the shadow on the boot, and the light source coming in from the side and the top. I mean, just look at the creation of this panel. It's so freaking impressive, dude.
The main storytelling thing that's cool for me is that the foot is coming through the door. So as far as storytelling, sometimes people will obscure the foot by the door, but this one you actually see a little chunk of like a jigsaw puzzle piece coming out that he's purposefully kicking. I mean, that's not realistic, but it is interesting and it is storytelling. So you definitely know that was his foot and that it's coming through the door. The other thing, as far as I think Eisner's, and it's probably where Joe was going, so I'm probably kind of poo-pooing all over Joe's moment here, but is the sequential book. So back onto what Aaron said, the ripples within the comics industry is, and I know that Aaron was told this as well, it's must reading, like How to Draw the Marvel Way, and then it was always the Bern Hogarth book, or the oh my gosh, what is the other guy's name? The Andrew Loomis books, and then it was sequential art. It was the Will Eisner book, and those were always must reading for a comic book artist. And so he does have. There's a lot of comic book DNA that Eisner helped contribute, because I know a lot of people cut their teeth on that book. I still have mine.
Well, and to your point, Art, with Will Eisner, his books, comics and sequential art, and then also graphic storytelling and visual narrative, I own those. As a writer and editor, I used those as part of a handful of books that really established the foundation for understanding how to break down comic book art, because I grew up reading comics and loving the art, but I didn't know much about it. And it wasn't until I started reading Eisner that I really started to understand how to analyze it and break it down. And those two books were based on lectures that he gave at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. So he was one of those guys that we were fortunate enough to have, not only as a creator, but as a teacher. And he passed on, what he understood of graphic storytelling to a bunch of different artists, not just through his work, but also through his teaching. And one of the things that I had wanted to mention that Chester had brought up is that with Eisner, you had in that generation of storytellers from the late 30s through the 40s, Eisner is the first one, and I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. Eisner is the first one that I know of who really brought that sort of dynamism to his art on a regular basis. Whereas you had guys, let's just say Bob Kane, for instance. Everybody I'm sure in the chat knows Bob Kane and Batman, right? So there was some dynamism in Bob Kane's Batman art, but to me, it looked very flat.
He actually ever drew Batman art, which is questionable.
He was taking the artwork from Eisner.
Well, yeah. So there's there you go. Great point. But where I was going with it is that to me, Kane's art seemed very flat for the most part back then, but Eisner's art seemed to be far more
draftsmanship.
Yeah, there was the skill of the draftsmanship combined with the understanding of storytelling, combined with the pure, almost the figure jumping off of the page quality that I didn't know any other artists of that time who were doing.
Well, I think Eisner also had like cartooning, like he wasn't just about realism. There was some crazy ass cartooning going on, like exaggerations and stuff. So it kind of fools you because you think like, with all these shadows and this, he sets up these really dramatic, like noirish kind of settings. But then there's like this crazy cartooning that's in there as well. So even though it's maybe a Talking Heads page, because of his cartooning and his gestural understanding, it still moves. It's still interesting.
Considering the era that he came from, right? one thing he doesn't get talked about for is the sexy. And if you go and look, there's many times you see Spirit without a shirt, you see low cut with a lot of cleavage. That wasn't being done
You don't
in
have to ask
other
me.
comics that weren't Jungle comics, or the heroine or whatever weren't in some kind of bathing suit or loincloth. He was doing it in normal sort of everyday occurrences. He was making putting a sex appeal into the comics in a graphic form, and he doesn't get talked about for that. But I went looking, and I found so much
I'm sure you did, Don.
cleavage and Spirit. Remember the cover? I think it's number 24, right? Where there's a box. He's a boxer, and he's leaning, and there's a punch coming through a brick wall. Well, that's a shirtless Spirit who's just in boxing pants. You know, really cool images that he was doing. And no one ever really kind of picked up on it.
Well, you know, Todd, that boxers fundamentally don't wear shirts, right?
I understand that,
Usually.
but you didn't normally put that kind of thing on a cover in 1940 or in you know what I mean? That wasn't normal.
Yeah. Well, let's go on. So Zach, what is your pioneer moment? What would you like to bring to the discussion? We should start wrapping this up soon.
Well, it kind of feels like anything I say isn't going to really be like a pioneer moment, because if you think about like Eisner, everything that I was thinking about the influences that kind of defined the 90s and my generation of.
No, go for it. This is like I said to Bob, like it's even personal things, like what personally influenced you as well. So it's not just like these huge moments, but they're also like, personal moments as well. So
Frank Miller essentially in Sin City was like the big thing when I was growing up. All of us knew about it. It kind of like it was this weird thing that was like none of our parents wanted us to know about it, so we definitely knew about it. But like just the way his stark contrast and stuff, but that comes from, if you look at Eisner stuff, you can actually just see like all the ripple that came from that all the way up.
Yeah, that's a boulder of a ripple, Frank Miller. That's a whole freaking episode.
Yeah. But everything that came out of what Frank Miller was doing really shaped the media for the influence of I know me personally and all the artists that I was associated with that growing up, and all of us because you got the Batman's his year one and everything like that. So that gave us a different Batman that wasn't all colorful, that was gritty and dark, and we all latched onto that hard. Us 90s kids, because the 90s was literally just a bunch of angry children. So,
we know. We're well aware.
So everything that was like Spawn related, anything dark. So Frank Miller was like our hero. So it was kind of strange.
Well, Frank Miller, I think, came in at the perfect time where, he brought some maturity back to comics, and I would throw Alan Moore and that kind of whole movement that happened
Swamp Thing, baby,
where things became kind of less, kid, and then more maybe, but the kids could still read them, but maybe a little bit more mature in a way. The interesting thing is I have an observation about Alan Moore and Frank Miller and their ripple effect is that there were a lot of guys that grew up on that, Zach, but didn't understand it. And no clue. Just went into, I think where we're at now, contemporarily speaking, some of those things we were talking about early on are those ripple effects where they're very mature, but they're almost just like the gratuitous part, the more exploitive part is there, but not the sophistication, not the understanding isn't there.
No, seriously, it really was just like, oh man, this guy got shot, and oh look, boobs, and it was so stupid. It was because the 90s was a really weird transition just in media in general, because that was like the transition from physical to digital. It's really happened in the 90s.
Hey Zach, to give you an idea of what it was like, so you've done a really good job in kind of giving a synopsis of what it was like as a 90s kid to encounter Frank Miller. In the 80s, I remember when The Dark Knight Returns was in my local bookstore as this giant hardcover book. And growing up, I was I watched the Super Friends cartoon. I watched the Batman 66 TV series. So I wore Batman underoos. If it was Batman, I was all over it. So I see this giant book in my bookstore.
Spider-Man.
The Dark Knight Returns, and it's got Batman on it. So I open it up. I'm a kid, right? I open it up. 2 words: mind blown.
Yeah.
I was like, well, it looks like Batman, but he's not doing Batman kind of stuff.
No.
Yeah, no.
Dude, Frank Miller's Dark Knight is what kept me reading comic books. Straight up.
He definitely wrote a fine line on that. Like, Batman was still a very moral character, and you could tell. But it was a very, very dark world, and the take on it was the world was darker. But it was also a more mature Batman. It was Gotham without the influence of the Dark Knight and things like that. So it really, really did fit. I think his year 1 is absolute genius with David Mazzucchelli. The Alex Toth influence and stuff in there is amazing.
And there's another book that no one ever mentions that he did, which was like kind of like this big bomb to all of us, which was Hard Boiled. Because it literally took like this dystopian future that none of us watched like Blade Runner or anything like that. We're all 90s kids, and that was boring. But you have this comic in your hand that literally is just like the most extreme thing you've ever seen in your life. It was like a huge impact, and I don't know how many copies of Hard Boiled are like now sitting in some vault.
I have mine. That's Jeff Darrow, right? The artist.
Yeah. But like like all the teachers taking them away.
Yeah.
And we just go to Barnes and Noble or wherever and get a new one because they didn't care. They're like, oh, it's a comic, and you're a kid, you can buy it, whatever.
Well,
think about what a profound influence in just a short period of time that Miller's Daredevil, especially near the end of it, and when Karen, whatever her name is, his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, was on heroin and all this kind of stuff. So you had Miller's Daredevil, you had The Dark Knight Returns, Killing Joke, and then suddenly the industry turned in this dark, grim anti-hero industry. It was kind of like what you mentioned before with people seeing it but not really understanding what they were seeing. It's a total movie industry move, right? You see this, you go, wow, that grim and gritty really sells, and now everything's grim and gritty and without any content or any any understanding of the subject matter.
Spider-Man or Superman's gritty.
Yeah, the birth of the Iron Age.
It changed the whole industry for a decade, and it's still with us with those guys. Just those couple of projects.
I blame Mel Gibson.
How ironic!
I blame Mel Brooks.
How ironic that both Alan Moore and Frank Miller have said in numerous interviews, they said, we were just doing a what if type of story with Watchmen, with Dark Knight Returns. We liked comics the way they were. We were not trying to tell the industry they should go another direction. We were just saying, hey, this is kind of a thought experiment as to what might happen if things went wrong.
Well, communist druids always lie, Joe. Remember that.
What?
Come on, that was a good one. Alan Moore joke. Come on.
That's an Alan Moore joke, yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
We definitely got a movement out of it. I mean, there were some crazy ripple effects, and I think there were some good. But I think for me there were more bad, because I think there was a generation that came out of that and just understood the superficial, like you guys were saying, but not the heart or not the meat of it.
The politics,
Yeah, which those guys did understand. Although Watchmen, holy shit, man, that is a complete and utter beatdown. I remember when it first came out, I was like, yeah, this is cool. But now when I'm an older guy, I'm like, this is really depressing.
Yeah, it is. Well, and of course, by talking about these guys, now you're opening the door to the British invasion conversation, and all those guys, because you talk about ripple effects in comic books. You can't say Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, Yeah, that's right. All those guys, Neil Gaiman particularly. I mean, what an effect that guy had. But these guys are really important, with ripple effects into the comic books, into the modern era, right?
Yeah. Well, let's see what Todd has to say, and then we'll wrap this bad boy up.
I'll just reiterate sort of what Chester was talking about, the UK guys. I think what they brought was maybe an understanding of that Frank Miller era, because that's what they liked and they talk about. So they brought a brutality to comics, because that was a brutal period where we grayed a lot of the lines then, you know what I mean, where the heroes were kind of grayer, and a lot of those guys like Warren Ellis and those guys, they wrote Punisher. The Authority is kind of a government controlled superheroes who just went after it, So granted, I agree, we have a lot less of that now, and we could use some more of it. Maybe it's looked at by the higher ups as, well, we want these heroes to be something that people want to be, but doesn't mean you get good quality product out of that. Those guys wrote books that were just superheroes fighting super villains for super stakes, and they didn't always win, and there was always a cost, and there were stakes involved. And you know what? It's where some of the best writing in comics, to me personally, that I've enjoyed happened, with some of these UK guys.
The Boys, I love The Boys.
Sometimes they deconstruct our heroes, and I'm not always for that, the deconstruction of a hero, but the antithesis of who the hero is, what he does, and then kind of putting him through the paces and having him be a fallible character, I did like, because they did it well. Now it's a little different.
Well, I think the key to that too was, I think Aaron said, or somebody say that a lot of those were Elseworlds tales as well. So you could get away with those. And back on what we were talking about earlier, is to keep them out of like the main Marvel universe or the main DC universe. So those can still be, all ages books. But then these Elseworld tales, these more mature books, can exist. And I applaud that. And I think we're just getting back to some of the stuff in the past is where they got into problems with, was when they started bringing like ideas from the Killing Joke into the DC universe, where that was a really, really dark story, probably one of the darkest Batman stories ever told. And then they brought that into canon. And then you're like, wait a minute. So this really happened. This wasn't just, like a one shot, what if? And so then all of a sudden those ripple effects become very, very, I guess, hard to recover from, because once you go there, like, how do you fix it, Yeah.
It for me, it's also just finishing up on that stuff, or responding to Todd's comment there. It's a really interesting case study, though, because if you think about when these guys came over, we were in the age of Reagan. The Americans were not at first, but were coming very positive and looking toward the future. It was an uplifting time from our point of view, in a way. But of course, over in Britain, you had the whole punk movement was in full force. You had anti-Thatcher sentiments with the young people in Britain, and they had a much more chaotic, anarchist type of feeling. And when those guys were brought over, they brought that feeling to the Americans, and the Americans.
Death's Head.
Yeah,
Well,
and it gave us something different.
They brought their culture into American comics and kind of changed American comics into this sort of darker British culture. And look where we are today.
Yeah. Blame the British. Always blame the British, dude. That's like an automatic.
It was rock and roll, then they came in and changed comics. I tell you, man.
I tell you, man, it's the ripple effects for the worst. Yeah. I think for me, as far as like me personally, we went over a lot of really cool stuff about just the origins of comics and things. There were two things, because I was the perfect age when the Marvel universe hit, 61, around that time, I remember seeing a lot of those early Marvel books on the newsstands and stuff like that. So, Kirby and Lee, it wasn't just about the Marvel universe that they created. It was a coherent universe. It was like something that we had never seen before, where there was an entire universe of superheroes. Like DC had a universe, but they didn't interact the way the Marvel characters did. And then one of the other things that they did is, instead of like an external, it was internal. So a lot of their Achilles heels weren't like fire or kryptonite or these type, or yellow. These things were like internal. And so I think those characters became more real and became more relatable because of that. So I think a lot of the modern, I think some of that stuff was done prior, but I think in a big way and in a big impactful way, those guys really did modernize comic books with just that one simple idea of that their Achilles heel is internal. It's not external. So they have internal demons or internal problems. And those are the things that people can relate to. The superheroics, like one of the things is always fundamentally you hear, oh, you can't relate to Superman. Well, that's another argument. But, based on the superficials, like, well, he's perfect. Yeah, but he's also Clark Kent. But like I said, that's another discussion. But then that's always the argument. And you can't make that argument with the Marvel characters, because all the characters all have that kind of internal demon that's there. And then there's a universe that's shared. And for me as a kid, I know, like DC, when I was young, they had the big Earth 1, Earth 2 crossovers, and those things were always cool. But they never seemed like the DC universe was one. Like the Marvel universe, it always felt like, oh, Spider-Man's going to be in a Daredevil comic. Daredevil's going to be in a Spider-Man comic. Like there was all this stuff of like them bopping in and out of each other's universe. And it was amazing, man. It was absolutely amazing as a kid. And then the other thing for me, and I think Aaron will be able to relate to this, was there was the illustrators, like the best of the best were coming into comics, like Jeff Jones and Barry Windsor Smith and Bernie Wrightson and even like I'll put Walter Simonson into that and
Sure.
Other guys that were pushing the envelope. Like I think Chaykin was pushing the envelope a little later, but with content, and so. I think for me as just like an artist, and the things that really impacted me were like those guys, because then it was like, you could aspire to be a freaking artist. You know what I mean? Like you could aspire to do your best. It wasn't just a matter of just banging out storytelling. It was a matter of like being inspired to like maybe try to do something beyond what had been done before, to try to make something that maybe has a statement just in itself, like the artwork itself has a statement. And then I would also throw like Neil Adams in there and Dick Giordano, like those guys were, I was like, this looks realistic, man. This isn't like Jack Kirby. I like that stuff as well, but it was going in a different direction. And to this day, I still like, as far as a pioneer, as far as influences on me, it's those two ideas, where you could have like your really cool, like bombastic comic book stuff, like Jack Kirby, but then you could have your like really, I don't know, like artist renditions as well. Like look at like Barry Windsor Smith, even when he was doing like things more on a monthly basis, that stuff was always inspired. I always got inspiration from it. And like guys like that. So I think, I guess they call it the studio, because those guys all were sharing studio space at the time. So what came out of that, I'm so thankful that those guys couldn't get illustration work, and slummed it, in comic books, throw Frank Frazetta in there as well,
Oh yeah,
because I think they elevated the art form. And I think those ripples are still felt today.
Yep. Yep, that was like the Renaissance period, artistic Renaissance period for comics was right around 1971 through about 75, 76, where all those guys, guys like Plug, they were in for a little bit, they went and worked with movies or whatever, but they were just, the art was suddenly more than just, you could look at Byrne or Perez or in the 70s, or any of the guys in the 70s, and they all sort of looked the same, but those guys were like brought a unique style and really, when you talk about your connected universe and stuff like that, before that, and the characters, it gets back to what we talked about earlier. That was back when Marvel was just a couple of guys, And no one was getting in their way, and they just did their thing, and it just turned out great.
Yeah, what's the story that the guy that was running, he was related to Stan Lee, and he just like turned the company over to Stan. It's like, whatever,
Martin Goodman. Yeah,
Goodman. Yeah. And, like that, just think about that. Like, what if, okay, Aaron, just like a hypothetical, what if right now your uncle like ran, a successful publishing company and just said, here you go, Aaron, just create whatever you want.
And you're in your early 20s.
Yeah, we'll publish it. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then you start going, hey, what's DC doing? Oh, well, we'll create the Fantastic Four based on this Justice League idea, Yeah. So I think there's been so much great stuff. This topic actually you could do like, several different streams, based on the same idea, and you could go on forever.
So
what's that?
We've done 3 hours already, so I don't know.
No, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, there's one guy that's trying to kind of in my head from the 70s. He did like military equipment and guns and stuff so well. I can't remember his name. He had kind of a funny name, but he's a really good artist. Damn, it's like Bird or Birdie or what was that?
A comic book artist or just an illustrator?
Yeah, comic book artist. Yeah, no, comic book artist. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't remember his name.
There were a lot of great war comics in the day, like that were brilliantly done. Like there was no internet, so those guys, they might get one or two shots of a tank, if they were lucky from their local library, and then they were just kind of making up the rest of the shots. It's like, holy shit, dude. Or they were watching these movies and just kind of trying to remember what they just saw because they couldn't freeze frame those movies. Yeah, those guys were badass, man. Well, we should let Aaron go. This isn't. Hey, Aaron. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say I'm falling asleep, but other than that, I'm fine.
No, this is an average pontificators. These things go like 2.5, 3 hours. So, yeah. Like I said in the description, it says we talk pop culture to death, and that's exactly what we're doing. We actually destroyed Aaron right now. Aaron's like,
that I'm supposed to be working on. Figured, I'll go in and talk to Art for an hour, and I'll be out of there. And
well, I should have prefaced it like I should have just said we'll have Aaron in for an hour. So I do apologize, but we do appreciate you hanging out with us and hanging in there for the 3 hours.
It was fun. Thank you
for having me. It was fun. I could sit around and talk about this stuff all day, but other things are pressing. So what do you do?
I hear you. I hear you, brother. So
funny dog videos are definitely pressing.
Let's let Aaron get his plug in, Chester. Jeez. Yeah, so I know you have a YouTube channel, and I've seen a lot of your Kit Carson stuff.
Yeah, get back to your YouTube channel. You're doing a lot of stuff on Facebook Live, but get back to that channel. It's excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've got a Kit Carter strip on. It's like free to read on my website blog right now, which is Aaron at. Well, let me try that again. Is AaronLopresti.com is my website. So you can just go there and check out the blog if you want to read. Wait a minute. There she is. Kit Carter back there. I'm trying to get one a week or so up. We'll see how that goes. I'm working on Justice League right now. So 48, 49, and 50 is the story arc I'm working on. So keep your eyes open for those. And then I'm all over social media. So I'm easy to find. So there you go.
Yeah, Aaron, like Todd was saying, he's got a killer YouTube channel. So go by, like the videos, subscribe, Aaron's one of the good guys. So yeah, give him all the love and support you can.
Are you still selling sketchbooks? Do you still have any more to sell?
Oh yeah, I got a ton of those.
Yeah, everybody go.
Wait, hold it up, Zach. Oh,
Gonna kill me.
Got rid of him. There it is. Yeah, nice, dude. That is nice.
And it came with an original.
Holy crap!
Nice, dude. Look at that.
Yeah, Aaron's wife draws those for him.
Yeah. I give her like $1 to draw the stuff for me, then I take the profits.
And then she shows you videos of like dogs.
See these are it. He just plugged it obviously, but it's a hardcover, 64 pages, full cover. My best and last sketchbook. So, and you can get a sketch in them for $45, $5 shipping, or $25 without a sketch. They're all signed and numbered, limited edition. So
yeah, go check out Aaron's site, buy a book, and his YouTube is killer. Are you planning on doing any crowdfund in the immediate future, or am I putting too much of a spotlight on you right now?
Well, we'll see. I got to do something. I got to try and do something with Kit Carter. So that's going to be my next thing, and it would be crowdfunded. I'm gonna try and get a little more interest going in it by posting this free stuff on my blog, and then of course doing video stuff about it. And so we'll see how that goes. But that, as of right now, that would be my next independent project, to see if I can get that going.
Flipbook.
Yeah, Todd says Flipbook. So Garbage Man, Kit Carter.
I will, because I actually have, for the Garbage Man Indiegogo campaign that failed, I do have a 15-page Garbage Man story. Hey, there we go. Guys pumping me up there. Thank you. That I want to do. And I figured, well, if I do the Kit Carter magazine or as a comic book, I can tuck that Garbage Man as a backup feature in the back of the book or something. So I might do that, because it is sort of sitting there waiting to be done. So we'll see. If I can get, I'm trying to get more followers on YouTube, and more social media following, because obviously you need thousands of people just to sell a couple hundred books, right? So that's what I'm trying to do, is build numbers right now, so that when I do launch again, I have a little bit more of a base to draw from, to get people in there to purchase the book, so it can be a success.
I love the look of that Garbage Man book.
If you want to learn how to compose a page that has really good storytelling and a good graphic content, like you see what he did behind him with the wording and stuff, his YouTube was doing that, and me, I was all over that. That may not be the most fun thing for people that were entertaining, but I learned so much about framing, bringing focus, by using the background to frame the character and stuff. It was just top notch. Absolutely, a really good YouTube channel.
A lot of process videos up there, and a few of me talking about comic books, and then all my live stream videos are jammed in with all the other pre-taped ones. But yeah, there's kind of a wide variety of content, but most of it is me drawing in some capacity and talking about it. So if you're into that, might be the YouTube channel for you.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you guys. Yeah, go check out Aaron's channel. I know most of us have channels as well. So go check out everybody's channel, like and subscribe, and support these talents, man. I do think this is the wave of the future. So Aaron and I and the rest of us are all following that wave and trying to get some good comics out there. So thanks again. We'll see you next week for another Pontificators episode. So take care, enjoy, have a great weekend.
Good night, guys.